Tonight, you're about to witness the story of Lyra Dain, a woman who was publicly humiliated, stripped of everything, and left to die in the most brutal territory known to her world. But instead of breaking, she became something no one expected, something dangerous. Stay until the end to see how the rejected outcast brought an entire system to its knees. And if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. Hit that like button. Let's begin. The summit hall stank of ambition and old wood. Lyra Dain stood in the center of it all, surrounded by 100 watching faces, and felt her world crack apart in real time. The Frontier Summit wasn't just a gathering, it was theater, a place where alliances were forged, power was displayed, and mates were claimed in front of witnesses who would spread the word across every settlement from the northern ice fields to the southern dust plains. Delegations came from territories so remote that some travelers spent weeks just getting here, crossing frozen rivers, navigating canyon systems, bribing their way through rogue-held checkpoints. This wasn't a casual meeting. This was where the hierarchy got rewritten every year. It was supposed to be her moment. The night she would stand beside Cade Merrick, alpha of the Ironwood Pack, respected, feared, untouchable, and be recognized as his chosen mate. Instead, she was being discarded. "You're not strong enough," Cade's voice carried across the hall, calm and cutting. He didn't even look at her when he said it. He looked at the council seated at the high table, at the rival alphas leaning forward in their chairs, at everyone except her. Lyra's breath caught. "What?" "You heard me." Now he did turn, and his expression was blank, practiced, like he'd rehearsed this in front of a mirror until every muscle in his face knew exactly how much indifference to show. "I made a mistake. You're unstable, weak. I can't have a mate who doesn't command respect." The room went silent. Not the good kind of silent. The kind that pressed down on you, suffocating. While people exchanged glances and smirked behind their hands, Lyra felt heat crawl up her neck, spread across her cheeks. Her hands shook, and she hated that they did, hated that everyone could see it. She curled her fingers into fists, nails digging into her palms hard enough to hurt. "You're—" She stopped herself, took a breath, tried to find words that wouldn't sound desperate. "You're doing this now? Here?" Cade shrugged, the gesture careless. "Better now than later. I need someone who can stand beside me, not behind me. Someone the Pax will follow." He gestured vaguely toward the crowd, like he was pointing out evidence in a trial. "You don't inspire that." Someone laughed. A short, sharp bark of sound from somewhere near the back, then another. Within seconds, the hall rippled with mocking whispers. Not loud enough to be called out, but loud enough to be heard. Loud enough to bury her. Lyra's chest tightened. She wanted to scream, wanted to grab him by the throat and demand an explanation that made sense. Demand that he look her in the eye and tell her why. But her body wouldn't move. She just stood there, frozen, while the man she'd trusted, slept beside, planned a future with, defended to her own family when they'd questioned the match, tore her apart in front of everyone who mattered. A woman from the Clearwater delegation leaned toward her companion and whispered, loud enough to carry, "I told you she wouldn't last. Too soft." "Surprised he kept her this long," the man replied, not bothering to lower his voice at all. Another voice from somewhere to Lyra's left. "What did she expect? She's got no lineage, no skills. She was a charity case from the start." Lyra's vision blurred. She blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. Not here. Not in front of them. Cade raised a hand and the murmurs died down. He commanded silence the way he commanded everything else. Effortlessly. "I'm releasing you from the bond. Effective immediately." He pulled a small blade from his belt. The ceremonial kind. Silver and etched with pack symbols that had been passed down through 4 generations of Ironwood alphas, and drew it across his palm without hesitation. Blood welled up, dark and quick. Then he let it drip onto the stone floor. 1 drop, 2, 3. The formal severance, the ancient way of breaking a bond, public, irreversible. Lyra stared at the blood pooling on the gray stone, watching it spread into the cracks between tiles. She should say something, do something, fight back. But what could she say? That he was wrong, that she was strong. No one here would believe her. They were already writing her off. She could see it in their eyes, the pity mixed with relief that it wasn't them standing there. The satisfied smirks from the ones who'd never liked her. The uncomfortable shuffling from the few who might have been her friends once before it became dangerous to associate with her. Go, Cade said quietly, almost gently, like he was doing her a favor. You're free. Free. The word tasted like ash. Lyra turned and walked toward the double doors at the far end of the hall. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Every step echoed, sharp clicks of her boots against stone that might as well have been drum beats announcing her humiliation. No one stopped her. No one spoke up. A few people moved aside as she passed, like she was contagious, like failure could spread through proximity. She caught a glimpse of herself in one of the polished shields mounted on the wall. Pale face, hollow eyes, the formal dress she'd spent hours choosing now looking ridiculous. She looked like a ghost. Maybe that's what she was now. She made it outside before her knees buckled. The night air was cold and sharp, cutting through the thin fabric of the dress like it wasn't there. She pressed her back against the rough stone wall and tried to breathe, but her lungs wouldn't cooperate. Everything was too tight, too loud. Even out here, away from the crowd, she could still hear them, still feel their eyes on her. Behind her, the doors swung open again and voices spilled out, laughter, music, the clink of glasses. The sound of people moving on like nothing had happened, like she'd never been there at all. Someone was making a toast. She couldn't hear the words, but she heard the roar of approval that followed. They were celebrating. Of course they were. Lyra pushed herself upright and started walking. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps that fogged in the cold air. She didn't know where she was going, didn't care. She just needed to move, needed to get away from the light and the noise and the eyes. The summit grounds sprawled across the old fortress complex, a massive structure that had been built centuries ago when the frontier territories were first being settled. It was a maze of courtyards and covered walkways and half-collapsed wings that hadn't been used in decades. Perfect place to disappear. She slipped into the shadows and kept going. No one followed. Of course they didn't. She was nothing now. Her feet carried her through passages she barely registered, under archways carved with symbols from the old wars, past courtyards where frost glittered on cracked fountains, through corridors where the torchlight didn't reach. She moved on instinct, taking turns without thinking, until the sounds from the summit hall faded to nothing, and all she could hear was her own breathing and the wind whistling through broken windows. She ended up in the eastern wing, the abandoned section. She'd heard about this place. Everyone had. It had been gutted by fire 20 years ago during some kind of territorial dispute that no one talked about anymore. 3 people had died. After that, they'd sealed it off, deemed it too unstable to repair. The stone was blackened in places, and the air smelled like charred wood and mildew and something else. Something stale and forgotten. Moonlight slanted through gaps in the roof, casting uneven patches of silver across the floor. Debris littered the ground, chunks of collapsed ceiling, burned furniture, shattered glass. Lyra picked her way through it carefully, her boots crunching on broken tile. It was quiet here. Empty. Good. She found a relatively clear spot against a wall and sank down, pulling her knees to her chest. Her hands were still shaking. She pressed them flat against the stone, forcing them to be still, but it didn't help. Nothing helped. She replayed the scene in her head. Cade's face, that practiced blankness, the laughter, the blood on the floor, the way he'd said, "You're free," like he was granting her some kind of gift. "You're weak." Was she? Maybe. She didn't feel strong. She felt hollow, used up, like something that had been squeezed dry and tossed aside when there was nothing left worth taking. How had she not seen this coming? There had been signs. She'd ignored them, made excuses. The way Kate had stopped asking her opinion on pack matters 3 weeks ago. The way he'd moved her to a smaller room in the compound, claiming it was temporary, for her own safety during the summit preparations. The way he'd stopped touching her, no more casual hand on her shoulder, no more standing close enough that she could feel his warmth. He'd been pulling away for a while. She told herself it was stress. The summit always put him on edge. But it hadn't been stress. It had been calculation. He'd been distancing himself so the rejection would be easier, so no one would question it. Footsteps echoed somewhere in the distance, steady, deliberate, not the hurried clicking of dress shoes like the summit guests wore. These were heavier. Boots. Lyra tensed. She wasn't supposed to be here. This wing was off limits, condemned, marked with warning signs she'd ignored in her desperation to get away. If someone from Summit Security found her, they'd drag her back, and she couldn't handle that. Not tonight. She'd rather take her chances with unstable floors than face those people again. The footsteps stopped. Lyra held her breath, pressing herself harder against the wall like she could melt into it. A voice cut through the silence. "You picked a hell of a place to hide." She jerked her head up. A man stood a few meters away, half in shadow. Tall, well over 6 feet. Broad-shouldered but lean, the kind of build that came from actual work, not gym training. He didn't move like the guards, too loose, too casual, like he owned the space without needing to announce it. He tilted his head, and the moonlight caught his face. Ronan Virek. Lyra's stomach dropped. Everyone knew Ronan. You didn't spend time in the frontier territories without hearing his name, usually spoken in tones that ranged from respectful to wary to outright fearful. He ran the Ashmark Pack, a group known for taking the jobs no one else wanted. Border patrols in the contested zones, rogue suppression, cleanup after territorial disputes that got bloody. They didn't play politics, didn't show up at summits unless there was money involved, and even then only if the price was right. They operated outside the normal hierarchy, answering to no council, no alliance. And Ronan himself had a reputation that made even seasoned alphas nervous. There were stories, probably half of them exaggerated, but even the confirmed ones were enough. He'd killed a rogue alpha in single combat when he was 19. He'd walked away from a 3-pack ambush with nothing but a limp and a new scar. He didn't negotiate, didn't compromise, didn't care what anyone thought of him. He was the kind of man people avoided, and now he was standing 10 feet away, looking at her like she was a puzzle he hadn't decided whether to solve. "I'm not hiding," Lyra said. Her voice came out rough, scraping against her throat. "Sure you're not." Ronan stepped closer, boots scraping against the stone. Pieces of debris shifted under his weight, but he didn't seem to notice. He stopped just outside arm's reach and crouched down, resting his forearms on his knees in a posture that was somehow both casual and alert. His eyes were pale, gray or maybe blue, hard to tell in the dark. And they didn't blink. They just watched her with an intensity that made her want to look away. "You always sit in condemned buildings after getting dumped in front of 100 people?" Lyra flinched. "I wasn't dumped." "Right, you were released." He said it like the word was a joke, like it was the funniest thing he'd heard all night. "That what we're calling it?" "Why are you here?" "Same reason as you, avoiding the circus." He glanced back toward the main hall, where faint music still drifted through the night, something upbeat and celebratory that made Lyra's chest ache. "I don't do well with crowds, or speeches, or alphas who think they're kings because they control a few hundred square miles of frozen dirt." Lyra studied him. Up close, he looked older than she'd expected. Not old exactly, but worn. Like someone who'd spent too many years doing things that left marks. There was a scar along his jaw, pale and jagged, the kind that came from something sharp and deliberate. His hands were scarred too, knuckles rough, fingertips calloused, a burn mark across the back of his left hand that looked relatively recent. "You saw what happened," she said. It wasn't a question. Ronan nodded. "Hard to miss." Merrick made sure of that. "Then you know I'm not worth your time." He laughed, a short, dry sound with no humor in it. "That what you think?" "That's what everyone thinks. Everyone's an idiot." He stood and offered her a hand, long fingers, palm calloused. "Come on, you can't stay here." Lyra stared at his hand. "Why do you care?" "I don't." He said it flatly, without malice. Just a statement of fact. "But if you freeze to death in here, someone's going to find your body, and I'll have to answer questions. I hate questions." Despite everything, despite the humiliation still burning in her chest, despite the fear and the anger and the bone-deep exhaustion, Lyra almost smiled. Almost. She took his hand. He pulled her to her feet easily, like she weighed nothing, and then let go just as quickly. No lingering touch. No unnecessary contact. "There's a service corridor 2 levels down. Leads to the old barracks. No one uses it anymore. You can hole up there until the summit's over." "Why are you helping me?" Ronan looked at her for a long moment. His expression was unreadable. Not cold, but not exactly warm either. Assessing. "Because you're still standing. Most people wouldn't be." He turned and started walking, not waiting to see if she'd follow. Lyra hesitated. Every instinct told her not to trust him. She didn't know him, didn't know what he wanted. And after tonight, trusting anyone felt like a mistake she couldn't afford to make again. What if this was some kind of setup? What if Cade had sent him to what? Finish her off? She was already finished. There was nothing left to take. But the alternative was staying here, alone, in a building that could collapse at any moment, in clothes that weren't made for winter nights, with no food, no water, no plan. She followed. The service corridor was narrow and dark, lit only by the dim glow of Ronan's phone. The walls were close enough that Lyra could touch both sides if she stretched her arms out. The air was stale, thick with dust that made her want to cough, but she held it in. Ronan moved through the passage like he'd been there before, navigating turns and staircases without hesitation, without even checking the phone screen for direction. He just knew. "How do you know this place?" Lyra asked. Her voice echoed weirdly in the confined space. "Used to do security for the summit, years ago." He didn't look back. "Before I figured out I'd rather work for myself." "What made you leave?" "Got tired of protecting people who weren't worth protecting." They descended another flight of stairs, these ones steeper than the last, the steps worn smooth in the centers from generations of use. The air grew colder with each level they dropped. Lyra wrapped her arms around herself. The dress she'd worn to the ceremony was useless down here, thin silk that might as well have been paper. It had cost her 3 months' worth of saved wages from the job she'd quit when Cade had asked her to move to Ironwood territory. She'd thought it was an investment in her future. Stupid. Ronan glanced over his shoulder. "You cold?" "I'm fine." "Liar." He stopped and shrugged off his jacket, a heavy, battered thing made of leather that looked like it had survived a few wars, and tossed it to her. "Put that on before you pass out." Lyra caught it reflexively. The leather was still warm from his body heat. "I don't need—" "Yes, you do. Don't argue. I don't have time to carry you if you collapse, and you look about 2 minutes away from hypothermia." She pulled the jacket on. It was too big, sleeves hanging past her hands, the hem falling almost to her knees. But it was warm, lined with something soft, fleece maybe, and it smelled like leather and smoke and something else she couldn't identify. Something that made her feel, irrationally, a little safer. She hated how much better it made her feel. Hated that such a small gesture could crack through the numbness. They reached the bottom of the stairs and stepped into a long, open room lined with rusted bed frames and broken lockers. The barracks. It looked like no one had been here in years. Dust coated everything in a thick gray layer, and cobwebs hung in the corners like tattered curtains. Some of the bed frames were overturned. Others were still made up with rotted blankets that had probably been there since the last occupants left. "Home sweet home," Ronan said. He crossed to the far wall and kicked open a locker, the metal door screeching in protest. He pulled out a rolled-up blanket that looked cleaner than the others and a dented canteen. "Water's probably stale, but it won't kill you." Lyra took the canteen and drank. He was right. It tasted metallic and old, like it had been sitting for months, but she didn't care. She hadn't realized how thirsty she was until the water hit her throat. She drank half of it before forcing herself to stop. Ronan leaned against the wall and watched her. "So, what's your plan?" "My plan?" "Yeah. You gonna sit here and feel sorry for yourself, or you gonna do something about it?" Lyra lowered the canteen. "Do something? Like what?" "I don't know. That's your job to figure out." He crossed his arms. The movement made the muscles in his shoulders shift under his shirt. "But I'll tell you this, guys like Cade don't just reject people for no reason. They do it when they're scared." "Scared?" Lyra laughed, bitter. The sound bounced off the walls. "Of what? Me?" "Maybe." Ronan pushed off the wall and walked toward her, his footsteps slow and deliberate. He stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You ever think about why he did it in public? Why he made a show of it?" "Because he's an asshole." "Sure. But he's also smart. And smart assholes don't burn bridges unless they think the bridge might burn them first." He tilted his head, studying her. "When did he start pulling away? When did the distance start?" Lyra opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. She thought back. The last few weeks. The last month, really. Cade had been different, colder. He'd stopped asking her opinion on pack matters. Stopped asking her anything, actually. Stopped touching her. moved her to that smaller room, started taking meetings without her, meetings she used to sit in on. She'd assumed it was stress, the summit, the politics, the constant pressure of managing alliances with packs that hated each other. But what if it wasn't? What if Ronan was right? 3 weeks ago, she said slowly, maybe 4, he started changing, pulling back. What happened 3 weeks ago? Lyra frowned, trying to remember. There was a council meeting, a private one. He came back from it angry, wouldn't tell me what it was about, said it was pack business, that I wouldn't understand. And before that? Anything unusual? She trailed off, the memory surfacing. There was an incident. One of the younger pack members challenged him. Not formally, just they disagreed about something in front of others. I stepped in, told the kid to back off, that he was being disrespectful. And? The kid backed off. Everyone did. They looked, I don't know, surprised maybe. Ronan nodded slowly. You commanded them. I didn't command anyone. You used authority you didn't know you had. And Cade saw it, saw the others respond to it. He stepped back. That's when he decided you were a threat. That's insane. I don't have power. I'm not. You don't know what you are. Ronan cut her off, his voice sharp. And that's the problem. You've spent so long letting other people define you that you forgot to figure it out yourself. You let Cade decide what you were worth. You let the pack decide where you fit. You probably let your family decide what you were capable of before that. Lyra felt something hot and defensive rise in her chest. You don't know anything about me. I know you're still alive. I know you walked out of that hall instead of falling apart. I know you made it here without asking for help. He moved toward the door. That's more than most people could do. Question is whether you're going to waste it. Wait. He paused, one hand on the doorframe. Why are you really doing this? Ronan looked back at her. For a moment, his expression softened, just slightly, just enough for her to see something human underneath the hard exterior. Because I know what it's like to be underestimated, and I hate wasted potential. Then he was gone, his footsteps fading into the dark corridor. Lyra stood there for a long time, the jacket still wrapped around her shoulders, Ronan's words echoing in her head. You don't know what you are. She sank down onto one of the old beds, springs creaking beneath her weight. The mattress was lumpy and smelled like mold, but she was too exhausted to care. She stared at the ceiling, at the water stains and cracks that spiderwebbed across the plaster. Maybe he was right. Maybe she didn't know. But she was going to find out. Bet. Lyra didn't sleep. She lay on the narrow bed staring at the cracks in the ceiling and tried to make sense of the last few hours. Everything felt surreal, disconnected, like it had happened to someone else and she'd just been watching from a distance. But it hadn't. It had happened to her. And now she was here, alone, cast out, wearing a stranger's jacket in an abandoned barracks that smelled like decay and forgotten things. She pulled Ronan's jacket tighter around herself. The weight of it was grounding, real. It reminded her that at least one person in this entire fortress hadn't looked at her like she was garbage. Not that it meant anything. He'd made it clear he didn't care. He'd just been practical about it. Didn't want to deal with finding her body. That was all. Still, he hadn't had to help. He could have walked past, pretended he hadn't seen her. That's what anyone else would have done. You've spent so long letting other people define you. The words kept circling back. She wanted to dismiss them, wanted to tell herself that Ronan didn't understand, that he was making assumptions based on nothing. But he wasn't wrong. She thought about her childhood, growing up in a small settlement on the outer edge of Clearwater territory. Her father had been a tradesman, decent at his work but not ambitious, not interested in climbing any social ladders. Her mother had been quiet, content to keep house and raise children and never make waves. They'd taught Lyra to do the same. Keep your head down. Don't cause problems. Be grateful for what you have. And she had been grateful, obedient. When the local alpha had needed someone to run messages between settlements, she'd volunteered. When they'd needed help organizing supply runs, she'd done it without complaint. She'd made herself useful. That's how she'd met Cade. He'd been visiting Clearwater for some alliance negotiation, and she'd been assigned to assist him, make sure he had everything he needed, show him around, answer questions. He'd been charming, attentive. He'd asked her about herself like he actually cared about the answers. 2 weeks later, he'd asked her to come back to Ironwood with him. She'd been so flattered, so sure that it meant something, that she'd been chosen because she was special, not just convenient. How had she been that stupid? Footsteps again. Lyra sat up, heart racing. Different from Ronan's, these were lighter, quicker, more hesitant. A figure appeared in the doorway, small, hooded. Female, based on the build. Lyra tensed, ready to run, but then the figure pulled back the hood and she recognized the face. Mira, one of the younger wolves from Cade's pack. Barely 20. She'd always been kind to Lyra, even when others weren't. She'd bring her tea sometimes when Cade was in meetings that ran long. She'd sit with her during meals when no one else would. Small kindnesses that had meant more than Mira probably realized. Mira? Lyra stood, confusion and alarm mixing in her chest. What are you doing here? Mira glanced over her shoulder, nervous. Her hands were shaking slightly. I shouldn't be. If anyone finds out I came, if Cade finds out, why did you? Mira stepped inside and closed the distance between them quickly, lowering her voice to barely above a whisper. Because you need to know something. About tonight. Lyra's chest tightened. What? It wasn't random. Mira's eyes were wide, frightened, brown eyes that kept darting toward the door like she expected someone to burst through any second. Cade didn't just decide to reject you. He was told to. The words didn't make sense at first. Lyra just stared at her. Told to? By who? The council, or someone on the council. I don't know all the details, but I heard him talking to Marcus this morning. You know Marcus, his second? They were in Cade's office and I was walking past and the door wasn't closed all the way. She was talking fast now, the words tumbling out like she'd been holding them in too long. They said you were a liability, that you'd become difficult. Difficult how? I don't know. But they were scared of you, Lyra. I could hear it in their voices. Marcus said something about you overstepping, and Cade said it was handled, that after tonight you wouldn't be a problem anymore. Mira grabbed her hand, her grip surprisingly strong. You need to be careful. Cade's not done. He's going to make sure you don't come back from this. Come back? I'm already gone. I'm nothing. No. Mira squeezed her hand harder. You're not. Not yet. But you will be if you don't move first. If you don't... Voices echoed from somewhere deeper in the corridor, male voices, getting closer. Mira's head snapped toward the sound, her face going pale. Shit! They're doing rounds. They're not supposed to be down here, but... She released Lyra's hand and pulled her hood back up, backing toward the door. I have to go. Wait. Mira, what am I supposed to do with this? What do you mean, move first? I don't know, She paused in the doorway, looking back. For a moment, she looked even younger than 20. Scared. Don't trust anyone from the summit. And don't let them see you weak. Whatever you were before, you can't be that anymore. Then she was gone, slipping back into the shadows like she'd never been there. Lyra stood frozen, her mind racing. They were scared of you. You'd become difficult, overstepping. What had she done? She tried to think of specific moments, specific actions that might have triggered this. But there was nothing dramatic, nothing that stood out. She'd been careful, so careful. Always deferring to Cade, always supporting his decisions, always staying in the background like she was supposed to, except that incident with the young pack member, when she'd stepped in without thinking, when she'd used that tone, sharp, commanding, and everyone had listened, and there had been other times, hadn't there? Small moments she'd dismissed, times when pack members had come to her with problems instead of going to Cade, times when her suggestions in meetings had been adopted, even when Cade had disagreed, times when she'd walked into a room and conversations had stopped, people had straightened up, like her presence meant something. She'd thought she was imagining it, thought she was being arrogant, reading too much into normal interactions. But what if she hadn't been imagining it? What if there was something there, something she hadn't recognized because she'd been taught her whole life not to look for it? The voices in the corridor were getting closer. Lyra could make out words now. Probably just rats. Supposed to check anyway. She needed to hide, or leave, or something. But her body wouldn't move. She just stood there, Ronan's jacket hanging off her shoulders, Mira's words repeating in her head. Don't let them see you weak. Whatever you were before, you can't be that anymore. The footsteps stopped right outside the barracks entrance. Lyra held her breath. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the room. It passed over the bed frames, the lockers, came to rest on Lyra. She didn't run, didn't cower. She just looked at the light, chin up, and waited. A man stepped through the doorway. Security uniform. Young, maybe mid-20s. He looked surprised to see her, his hand going reflexively to the weapon at his belt. This area is off limits, he said. You need to leave. Lyra didn't move. I'm not going back. I'm not asking you to go back. I'm telling you to leave this wing. It's dangerous. Everything's dangerous. The guard frowned. He took a step closer, the flashlight still pointed at her face. You're the one from tonight, the one Merrick rejected. Yeah, that's me. He looked uncomfortable. His hand left the weapon. Look, I don't want trouble. Just go to the guest quarters or I'm not a guest anymore. Then go to town. There's an inn about a mile. I don't have any money. That stopped him. He stared at her, clearly not sure what to do with this information. Protocol probably didn't cover what to do with rejected mates who refused to leave condemned buildings. Finally, he sighed. You can't stay here. Why not? Because it's not safe. The floor could collapse, the ceiling could come down. There's no heat, no water that isn't contaminated. Sounds perfect. You're not listening. No, you're not listening. Lyra took a step toward him, and something in her voice made him step back. She could feel it, that same thing that had happened with the young pack member. A shift in the air, a weight to her words that hadn't been there before. I have nowhere else to go. I have no money, no allies, and no pack. You can drag me out of here if you want, but I'll just come back. Or I'll find somewhere else just as bad. So you can either waste your time chasing me around, or you can pretend you never saw me. The guard stared at her. She watched him process it, watched him weigh his options. He was young enough that he probably still believed in rules and doing things the right way, but he was also smart enough to recognize a no-win situation. I didn't see you, he said finally. Good. He backed toward the door, the flashlight beam dropping. But if this wing collapses and you die, that's on you. Everything's been on me for a while now. He left. She listened to his footsteps fade, waited until she was sure he was gone. Then she sat back down on the bed and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from whatever the hell she'd just done. She'd commanded him, not asked, not begged, commanded, and he'd listened. Lyra looked down at her hands like they belonged to someone else. You don't know what you are. Ronan was right. She didn't, but she was starting to get an idea, and it terrified her. Lyra woke to the sound of footsteps above her head, not the careful, measured steps of guards doing rounds. These were heavier, multiple sets, moving fast. She sat up, disoriented. Gray morning light filtered through the gaps in the ceiling. Her body ached. The bed had been about as comfortable as sleeping on rocks, and her mouth tasted like dust. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The rejection, the hall, Cade's blood on the floor. She pushed herself off the bed, Ronan's jacket still wrapped around her. The footsteps moved across the floor above, accompanied by voices. She couldn't make out words, but the tone was clear enough. They were looking for something, or someone. Lyra moved to the doorway and peered into the corridor. Empty. The voices were coming from higher up, probably the ground floor. She needed to move, but where? This wing was a dead end. The only way out was back through the service corridor, and if they were searching the building, they'd find her eventually, unless she found a better hiding spot first. She was weighing her options when a hand grabbed her shoulder and yanked her backward. Lyra spun, fist already coming up, but Ronan caught her wrist before it connected with his face. Easy, he said. It's me. You can't just... She stopped, lowering her voice to a harsh whisper. What are you doing here? Saving your ass, apparently. He released her wrist and moved past her to the doorway, listening. The muscles in his jaw were tight. They're doing a sweep. Someone reported seeing you in the East Wing last night. The guard. What guard? Security came through around midnight, young guy. I told him to leave me alone. He did. Ronan looked at her, one eyebrow raised. You told him? Yeah. And he just left? Yeah. He studied her for a moment, something unreadable flickering across his face. Not surprise exactly, more like confirmation of something he'd suspected. Then he shook his head. Doesn't matter now, he talked. They're coming back with more people, and this time they won't be polite about it. You need to leave. I'm not going back to that hall. I'm not asking you to. Come on. He started down the corridor, moving quickly but quietly. His boots made almost no sound on the stone floor. Lyra followed, staying close. Where are we going? Somewhere they won't look. They navigated through passages Lyra didn't recognize, going deeper into the wing instead of toward the exit. The voices behind them grew fainter, but didn't disappear entirely. She could hear doors being thrown open, furniture being moved. They were thorough. After several turns that left Lyra completely disoriented, Ronan stopped at what looked like a solid wall. He ran his hand along the stone until he found something, a crack, barely visible even when you knew to look for it, and pushed. A section of the wall swung inward with a grinding sound that made Lyra wince. How did you... Old fortress, full of secrets if you know where to look. He gestured for her to go through. Move. The space beyond was small and dark, more of a closet than a room. Maybe 4 feet by 6 feet. Lyra stepped inside and immediately felt the walls pressing in. Ronan followed her in and pulled the door shut. The grinding sound reversed, and then there was nothing but darkness and the sound of their breathing. Lyra's heart was pounding. The space was too small. She could feel Ronan's body heat in the confined area, smell the leather and smoke scent that clung to his clothes. What is this? She whispered. Priest hole. They used to hide here during the religious purges back when the frontier was first settled. Hundreds of years ago. Most people forgot they exist. But you didn't. I make it my business to know things other people forget. Information's more valuable than gold out here. They stood in silence for a moment. Lyra could hear footsteps again, closer now, passing right by their hiding spot. Multiple sets. The searchers were spreading out, checking every room, every corridor. She held her breath until they faded. How long do we stay here? She asked. Until they give up. Could be an hour, could be 3. Depends how motivated they are. Great. You got somewhere better to be? Lyra didn't answer. She shifted her weight, trying to find a position that wasn't uncomfortable in the confined space. Her shoulder brushed against Ronan's arm. He didn't move away, but he didn't acknowledge the contact either. The silence stretched out. Lyra's eyes adjusted to the darkness enough to make out the faint outline of Ronan's face, though she couldn't read his expression. That thing you did with the guard, he said after a while. His voice was quiet, barely above a whisper. Tell me exactly what happened. So she did. Described the confrontation, the way her voice had changed without her meaning it to, the way the guard had backed down even though he'd had every right and reason to drag her out of there. The way it had felt. Like something inside her had shifted, found a new gear she didn't know existed. Ronan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. You felt it, he said finally. It wasn't a question. I don't know what I felt. Yes, you do. You just don't want to name it. He paused, and she heard him shift in the darkness. It's called presence. Some people are born with it. Others develop it under pressure. It's rare. And it's powerful. I'm not powerful. You keep saying that. Doesn't make it true. His voice was matter of fact, not argumentative. Presence is about command, about making people listen and obey without having to force them. It's subtle. Most alphas don't have it. They just have authority from their position, from their pack standing. But real presence? That's something else entirely. That's personal power. If I had this thing, someone would have noticed before now. They did. That's why you're here, hiding in a wall. Ronan shifted again, and his shoulder pressed against hers in the tight space. You said Cade started pulling away after you stepped in with that pack member. That wasn't a coincidence. He saw you command his people, saw them respond to you like you had the right, like you were the alpha. And he couldn't have that. Couldn't have his mate wielding power that might challenge his own. So he destroyed me instead. He tried. Question is whether it worked. Lyra thought about that. thought about the guard backing down, about the way Cade had looked at her during the rejection, not just dismissive, but afraid. She'd caught it for just a second before he'd masked it. She'd dismissed it at the time, thought she was seeing things, reading too much into a flicker of expression, but maybe she hadn't been. "What am I supposed to do with this?" she asked quietly. "Whatever you want. That's the thing about power. It doesn't come with instructions or a manual." He paused. "But if you're asking my advice, learn to control it before someone else figures out what you can do and uses it against you." "Someone like who?" "Someone like the council members who told Cade to get rid of you." The words hung in the darkness between them. "Mira said—" Lyra stopped, not sure if she should mention the visit. "Who's Mira?" "One of Cade's pack. Younger wolf. She came to warn me last night after you left. Said Cade was told to reject me, that the council thought I was a liability." Ronan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was harder. "Did she say which council members?" "No. Just that they were scared of me. That I was difficult. That I was overstepping. They should be scared." There was something sharp in his voice now, something dangerous. If they think you're a threat as an outsider with no resources and no allies, imagine what they'll do if you actually become dangerous, if you gain real power. "I'm not trying to threaten anyone. I just want—" She stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. What did she want? To go back to how things were before? Impossible. To disappear? She'd tried that and they'd still come looking. "Survival's not enough," Ronan said, like he could read her mind. "Not anymore. You survive, you're still just prey waiting for the next predator. You need to become something they can't touch, something they have to respect. And how do I do that? You train, you learn, you figure out what you're capable of, and then you push past it." He shifted in the darkness, and she felt his hand find her arm. His grip was firm, but not painful. "I can help, if you want." "Why would you help me?" "Because I'm tired of watching people with real potential get crushed by people with nothing but inherited titles and unearned authority." His hand dropped away. "And because you're more useful to me alive and trained than dead or broken." "Useful how?" "Haven't decided yet. But I will." It should have bothered her being thought of as useful, as a tool, a potential asset. But after everything that had happened, after being told she was worthless, after being discarded like trash, at least it was honest. At least Ronan wasn't pretending to care about her well-being out of some noble impulse. He saw value in her, even if she couldn't see it herself yet. "Okay," she said. "Okay, what?" "Help me. Teach me. Whatever this is, whatever I can do, I want to learn it." She couldn't see his face in the darkness, but she heard the approval in his voice. "Good. We start as soon as we get out of here." They waited in silence for another hour. The footsteps above them eventually faded. Voices grew distant and then disappeared entirely. When Ronan finally pushed the door open, daylight was streaming through the gaps in the ceiling, brighter than before. "They've moved the search to other wings," he said, listening. "We need to move now, while we have the chance." "Where are we going?" "My room in the West Wing. It's registered under a false name, paid for in cash. They won't connect it to me, and even if they do, they won't think to look for you there." He stepped out of the priest hole and offered her his hand. Lyra took it and let him pull her out. Her legs were stiff from standing in the cramped space for so long. She stumbled slightly, and Ronan steadied her. "You good?" "Yeah, just need to move." "Then move like you belong," he said, his voice taking on an instructional tone. "Head up, eyes forward. Don't scurry, don't rush. People see what they expect to see. Right now they expect to see you broken and hiding, so don't be that." Lyra took a breath and straightened her spine, lifted her chin, pushed her shoulders back. It felt wrong, performative, like she was play-acting at confidence. But she did it anyway. They walked through the fortress like they had every right to be there. Through corridors that were busier now, full of servants carrying breakfast trays and summit guests emerging from their rooms, past guards stationed at intersections who barely glanced at them. A few people looked at Lyra, recognition flickering in their eyes, but no one stopped them. No one asked questions. She kept her head up, kept moving, and nobody challenged her right to exist in that space. It was bizarre. Yesterday she'd been the center of attention, the scandal everyone whispered about. Today, walking with purpose instead of shame, She might as well have been invisible. By the time they reached Ronan's room, Lyra's heart was pounding, but they'd made it. No confrontations, no drama. Ronan unlocked the door and ushered her inside. The room was sparse. Bed, table, 2 chairs, a trunk in the corner. Nothing personal. Nothing that indicated who lived here. It could have been any traveler's temporary quarters. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs. Lyra sat. Ronan pulled the other chair around and straddled it backward, arms folded across the top. He studied her with those pale, unblinking eyes. "First lesson," he said. Stop apologizing for existing." "I didn't." "You do. Every movement, every word. You make yourself smaller. You defer. You apologize with your body language even when you're not saying the words." He leaned forward. "That stops now. You want presence? You need to claim space, own it, like you have the absolute right to be wherever you are. That's easy for you to say. She gestured vaguely at him. "You. And you think I came out of the womb commanding rooms? I learned this. Same way you're going to learn it." He stood and moved to the trunk, pulling out a bundle of clothes. Dark pants, a plain shirt, boots. "Put these on. That dress is a liability. Makes you look like you're still performing for an audience." Lyra looked at the clothes he'd tossed her. All too big for her frame, but functional, practical. "Where did you—" "I keep supplies. Never know when you'll need them." He turned his back, giving her privacy. "Change. Then we'll start." She changed quickly, peeling off the silk dress she'd worn to the ceremony and pulling on the borrowed clothes. The pants were too long and she had to roll them up at the ankles. The shirt hung loose on her frame. She rolled up the sleeves. The boots were too big, but she laced them tight and they stayed on. When she was done, she felt different, more grounded, less exposed, less like she was wearing a costume. "Better," Ronan said, turning back. He looked her over with an assessing eye. "Now, show me what you did with the guard. Use that voice on me." Lyra blinked. "What?" "The command, the thing that made him back down. Do it again, on me." "I don't know how I did it the first time." "Then figure it out. Try." Lyra stood there, feeling ridiculous. "This won't—" "Stop thinking. Just do it." His voice was sharp now, challenging. "Tell me to do something. Anything." She took a breath. "Sit down." Nothing happened. Her voice sounded normal, weak even, uncertain. "Pathetic," Ronan said flatly. "Try again." Heat rose in her cheeks. "Sit down." "Like you mean it." "I do mean it." "No, you don't. You're asking, hoping, begging me to sit down with your tone, with your body language." He stepped closer. "You need to know I'm going to sit. You need to be so certain that I have no choice but to obey. There can't be any question in your voice, in your stance. Try again." Lyra clenched her jaw. Felt something hot building in her chest. Anger, maybe. Or frustration. "Sit. Down." Ronan's eyebrows raised slightly. "Better. Again." "Sit down." "Better still. Keep going. Don't stop until you get it right." They drilled it for what felt like hours. The same 2 words over and over until Lyra's throat was raw and her head pounded with the effort of trying to find that place she'd touched the night before. That gear she'd shifted into without meaning to. Ronan never sat. Never gave her the satisfaction of compliance. Just kept pushing, kept demanding more, kept telling her she was almost there but not quite. The sun moved across the sky outside the window. Lyra's voice grew hoarse. Her frustration built to a breaking point. And finally something inside her snapped. She was exhausted and frustrated and done with being told she wasn't enough, wasn't strong enough, wasn't anything enough. "Sit the fuck down." The words came out like a whip crack. Sharp, absolute, undeniable. Ronan sat. Not because he chose to. She could see it in his eyes. The surprise, the momentary loss of control. His body responded before his mind could stop it. He was in the chair before he realized he'd moved, and for just a second he looked genuinely startled. They stared at each other. "There it is," Ronan said quietly. "That's what you've been hiding." Lyra's hands were shaking. She felt like she'd just run a mile uphill. Her pulse hammered in her ears. "What was that?" "That was you actually trying. That was presence backed by will, by genuine intent." He stood, slower this time, deliberate, making it clear the movement was his choice now. And that's just the beginning of what you're capable of. Over the next several hours, Ronan put her through exercises. Some physical, teaching her how to stand without shifting her weight uncertainly from foot to foot. How to move through space with purpose. How to use her body to project confidence even when she didn't feel it. Others, mental, visualization techniques, breathing exercises, ways to center herself when everything felt like chaos. Presence isn't about being loud, he explained during a break. He'd made her walk the length of the room 50 times, correcting her posture, her gait, the way she held her head. It's about being certain. It's the difference between someone who asks for what they want and someone who knows they're going to get it. The former leaves room for negotiation, for refusal. The latter doesn't. But I don't know that I'm going to get what I want. Then fake it until you do. That's how everyone starts. Every alpha you've ever met, every leader, they all started by pretending they had the right to lead until other people believed it. Then they believed it themselves. He handed her water from a pitcher on the table. The brain doesn't know the difference between real confidence and performed confidence. Do it long enough, consistently enough, it becomes real. They worked through the afternoon. Ronan taught her how to make eye contact without looking away first, how to speak without hedging or softening her words with qualifiers, how to give orders instead of making requests. He was relentless, pointing out every time she slipped back into old habits, dropping her eyes, hunching her shoulders, adding maybe or if you don't mind to her sentences. You're not asking for permission to exist, he said when she apologized for the 10th time. Stop acting like you need it. By the time he called a stop, the sun was setting outside the window, painting the room in shades of orange and red. Lyra's muscles ached in new ways, from holding positions she wasn't used to, from the constant tension of trying to embody something she didn't feel. You did well, Ronan said. Better than I expected for a first session. I feel like I got hit by a truck. You'll feel worse tomorrow. This kind of training, it's not just physical. You're rewiring patterns you've spent your whole life building. He moved to the door. Stay here tonight. I'll bring food. Where are you going? To gather information. The summit's ending tomorrow morning. I need to know what's being said about you, what the narrative is becoming. About me? You're the scandal of the season. People are talking. I want to know what they're saying, what story is solidifying. He paused, hand on the doorknob. Lock this behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. I don't care what they say. I don't care what they promise. How will I know it's you? I'll knock 3 times, pause, then twice. Got it? Lyra nodded. Ronan left. She locked the door behind him and sank into the chair, every muscle screaming. She'd never been this tired in her life. Not after the longest days of work in her old settlement. Not after the most exhausting pack duties Cade had assigned her. But underneath the exhaustion, she felt something else. Purpose. For the first time since the rejection, she had a direction, a plan. She wasn't just surviving, wasn't just hiding and waiting for the next blow to fall. She was preparing, building something. For what? She didn't know yet. But she'd be ready. She must have dozed off in the chair because the next thing she knew, someone was knocking on the door. 3 times. Pause. Twice. Lyra stood, her body protesting the movement, and unlocked the door. Ronan entered with a tray of food, bread, cheese, some kind of stew that smelled better than anything she'd eaten in days. He set it on the table. Eat, he said. You need your strength back. Lyra ate. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food hit her stomach. She'd barely eaten since the rejection, and her body was demanding fuel. She finished half the tray before forcing herself to slow down, to savor it instead of just shoveling it in. What did you find out? She asked between bites. Ronan settled into the other chair, his expression thoughtful. You're the favorite topic at every table. The main entertainment. Half the people think Cade was absolutely right to reject you. The other half think he handled it badly, but agree with the outcome, that you weren't suitable. So everyone thinks I'm worthless. Not everyone. There's a smaller group, mostly outsiders, people without pack affiliations, merchants and traders who operate independently, who think something's off. They're asking questions. Why the public rejection? Why now, in the middle of the summit instead of before or after? Why make such a spectacle of it? He paused. And there are a few who noticed something else. Who think Cade looked scared? Lyra looked up from her food. Who? Who noticed that? Does it matter? The point is, cracks are forming in the narrative he's trying to build. People are starting to wonder, starting to question the official story. He leaned back in his chair. That's dangerous for Cade, and for whoever pushed him to do it. Good. Don't get cocky. Dangerous for them means dangerous for you too. If they think you're going to be a problem, if they think the story isn't settling the way they wanted, they'll deal with you, permanently this time. The word hung in the air between them. You mean kill me? I mean remove you as a variable, whether that's killing you or discrediting you so thoroughly that no one will listen to anything you say ever again, the result's the same. You're gone. Erased. He met her eyes across the table. So we need to move faster than they do. Move how? First, we get you out of here. The summit ends tomorrow morning. Most people will leave by midday, delegations heading back to their territories, merchants packing up their wares. We leave with them, blend into the crowd. Just 2 more travelers on the road. And go where? My territory, Ashmark. It's remote, defendable, and no one there gives a damn about summit politics or pack hierarchies. He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the fortress grounds. We'll train properly there. Build your skills, develop that presence, until you can wield it like a weapon. And when you're ready, when you're strong enough that they can't just dismiss you or silence you, we'll come back. Come back for what? Ronan turned from his window, and his smile wasn't kind. It was sharp and cold and full of promise. To show them what they let slip through their fingers. To make them regret ever underestimating you. Before Lyra could respond, a knock at the door made them both freeze. Not Ronan's pattern, just steady, insistent knocking. Then a voice, muffled but recognizable. Lyra, I know you're in there. Cade. Lyra's blood went cold. She looked at Ronan, who was already moving, positioning himself between her and the door. His hand went to his belt, where she noticed for the first time he carried a knife. Don't open it, he mouthed silently. The knocking came again, harder this time, more insistent. Lyra, we need to talk. No, we don't, Lyra called back. Her voice only shook a little, and she was proud of that. Please, I need to explain. There are things you don't understand. You explained plenty last night in front of everyone. A pause. She could almost hear him thinking, recalibrating. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, almost vulnerable. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But there are things I couldn't say in front of the council, in front of all those people. Things you need to know. Ronan was shaking his head firmly. Don't engage, don't give him anything. But Lyra was already moving toward the door. Not to open it, just closer, so she could hear better. What things? Let me in, please. I'll tell you everything. I'll explain what really happened. Tell me now. Through the door. Another pause. Longer this time. When Cade spoke again, his voice had changed completely. Lower. More earnest. I was trying to protect you, Lyra. That's what you have to understand. I was trying to save your life. Lyra laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. Protect me? You humiliated me in front of the entire summit. I had to. They were going to kill you, Lyra. The council. They saw you as a threat, as something dangerous that needed to be eliminated. I convinced them that rejecting you publicly would be enough. That you'd leave, disappear into the frontier, and they'd forget about you. That you'd be too broken, too humiliated to ever come back. His voice was pleading now, desperate. If I'd defended you, if I'd refused their order, they would have had you killed that same night. The rejection was the only way to keep you alive. This was mercy. Ronan was shaking his head, mouthing the word lies emphatically. But part of Lyra wondered, what if Cade was telling the truth? What if he'd been backed into a corner, forced to choose between humiliating her and watching her die? What if the cruelty had been kindness in disguise? Why should I believe you? She asked. Because I'm here. Because I'm risking everything by coming to you now, by trying to warn you. If the council finds out I came to see you, if they know I'm still in contact. He stopped, and she heard him take a shaky breath. Please, let me in. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. 5 minutes to explain everything, and then I'll go. I'll leave you alone if that's what you want. Lyra's hand moved toward the lock without her quite deciding to move it. Ronan grabbed her wrist, his grip iron tight. "Don't," he said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. "This is a trap." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. Think, Lyra. Use that brain I know you have." His eyes bored into hers. Why now? Why come here alone at night with this convenient explanation that makes him the hero? Why not send a message through someone neutral? Why not meet you in a public place where you'd have witnesses, protection? Maybe he couldn't, maybe. No maybes. This is predator behavior. He's here to see if you're alone, to see who's helping you, or worse. Or worse what? Or to finish what the council started. You think a door will stop him if he really wants to get to you? Lyra looked at the door. At Ronan. Back at the door. Her hand was still on the lock. Cade knocked again, and she could hear the desperation creeping into his voice. "Lyra, please. I'm trying to save your life. There are people at this summit who want you dead. I can protect you, but only if you let me. Only if you trust me." She made a decision. Her hand dropped from the lock. She stepped back. "Go away, Cade." Silence. Then, "What?" "You heard me. Go away. Leave me alone." She let her voice carry through the door, clear and firm. "I don't want your explanations. I don't want your protection. I want nothing from you. Lyra, you're not thinking clearly. You're upset. You're scared." "No." She stepped closer to the door, and this time she let some of that presence Ronan had been teaching her color her words. "You made your choice last night. You chose your position, your safety, your political convenience over me. Now I'm making my choice. Stay away from me. Don't contact me. Don't look for me. We're done." The silence stretched out, thick and tense. Lyra could almost feel Cade on the other side of the door, trying to process this, trying to figure out his next move. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed again, colder now. The warmth, the pleading, it was gone. "I'm sorry you feel that way. Just that. Nothing else." Footsteps. Moving away down the corridor. Lyra waited until they faded completely, until she couldn't hear anything but her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, before letting out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Good," Ronan said, releasing her wrist. "You made the right call. How do you know? What if he was telling the truth?" "He wasn't. Trust me on this." He moved to the window again, checking the courtyard below, with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent years watching for threats. If he really wanted to explain, he would have done it in front of witnesses. Somewhere you'd have protection, leverage. Coming here alone at night? That's predator behavior. That's someone who wants you isolated and vulnerable. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe. But I've been doing this a long time, and I've learned to trust my instincts about people. He turned from the window, his expression serious. "And my instincts say Cade is more dangerous to you now than he was before. Before, you were just an embarrassment. Now you're something else. Something that worries him enough to come looking." "What am I?" "Unknown, unpredictable. You didn't react the way he expected, didn't break down, didn't come crawling back begging for another chance, didn't run away in terror. You stood your ground. You refused him." Ronan's eyes gleamed in the lamplight. "That makes you dangerous. And that means we need to leave. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Now." "But you said—" "I know what I said. That was before he showed up here. Before he demonstrated that he knows where you are, and that he's willing to come after you personally." Ronan moved to the trunk and started pulling out supplies. A pack, water bottles, dried food. "He knows you're in this room, which means others might know too, or will know soon. We can't stay here." "Where will we go?" "There's a back way out of the fortress, servants' entrance that leads to the outer walls. We'll go on foot until we're clear, then I've got a vehicle stashed about 3 miles out." He tossed her a heavy cloak. "Put that on. We leave in 5 minutes." Lyra pulled on the cloak, her mind racing. Everything was happening so fast. 24 hours ago, she'd been preparing for what should have been the best night of her life. Now she was fleeing in the dark with a man she barely knew, running from threats she didn't fully understand. But what choice did she have? Stay here and hope Cade's story was true? Hope the council would just forget about her? She knew better. The moment she'd felt that shift, that presence, she'd known things had changed. There was no going back to being invisible, being harmless. "Ready?" Ronan asked, slinging the pack over his shoulder. Lyra nodded, even though she wasn't. Even though every instinct screamed that she was making a terrible mistake, trusting this man, following him into the unknown. But her other option was staying, and staying meant being found. They made it 3 corridors before they heard voices ahead. Ronan pulled Lyra into a side passage, pressing her against the wall. His body was warm against hers, solid and real. 2 guards walked past the intersection, talking in low voices. Increased patrols in the East Wing. Waste of time if you ask me. She's probably gone by now. Alpha's orders, and you don't question those. Heard he went to find her himself, didn't find anything. Makes you wonder what he's so worried about. They continued past, their voices fading. Ronan waited until their footsteps disappeared completely before moving again, pulling Lyra along. They're definitely looking for you, he murmured, and the guards are starting to question why. That's good for us. Means the story's not as solid as Cade wants it to be. How is that good? They're still hunting me. But they're not sure why. Confusion creates hesitation. Hesitation creates openings. He navigated another turn, moving through the fortress like he had the layout memorized. We just need one opening, one moment when they're not watching the right place. They reached what looked like a servant's corridor, narrower than the main passages, with lower ceilings and rougher walls. Ronan led her through it confidently, past storage rooms and what looked like old kitchens that hadn't been used in years. Finally, they reached a small door barely 5 feet high. Ronan crouched and pushed it open. Cold night air rushed in. Through here, he said. Stay low. Lyra ducked through the door and found herself in a narrow alley between the fortress wall and a storage building. The space was barely wide enough for one person to walk comfortably. Ronan followed her out and closed the door behind them. They were about to move when lights flared at the end of the alley. There, someone's there! Lyra didn't look back, didn't think. She just ran. Ronan was faster, longer legs, better conditioning, but he stayed with her, matching her pace. They reached the end of the alley and burst out into a wider courtyard. More shouts behind them, more lights. This way! Ronan grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the perimeter wall. They made it to the wall before the guards rounded the corner. Ronan boosted Lyra up, his hands strong under her foot, and she scrambled over the top. The stones were rough under her hands, scraping her palms. She dropped down on the other side and stumbled, catching herself before she fell. Ronan came over the wall a second later, landing in a controlled crouch. Keep moving, he said, and they were running again, down a slope toward a tree line. Behind them, more shouts. The sound of guards coming over the wall, multiple sets of boots hitting the ground. Can't have gone far. Split up, cover more ground. They reached the trees and Ronan pulled her into the shadows, pressing a finger to his lips. They stood perfectly still, chests heaving, trying to control their breathing. The guards crashed through the underbrush nearby, spreading out, searching. One passed within 10 feet of their hiding spot, so close Lyra could have reached out and touched him. She held her breath, didn't move a muscle. The guard moved on. After what felt like an eternity, the voices and footsteps faded. The searchers were moving away, searching in the wrong direction. Ronan waited another 5 minutes before tugging Lyra deeper into the forest. They walked for what felt like hours, navigating by moonlight and Ronan's apparent intimate knowledge of the terrain. The trees grew thicker, the ground rougher. Lyra's borrowed boots rubbed blisters on her heels, but she didn't complain, just kept moving. Finally, they emerged onto a dirt road where a battered truck sat waiting in the shadows. It looked old, maybe 20 years, with rust spots and a cracked windshield. But when Ronan opened the door, the interior was clean and well-maintained. Friend of yours? Lyra asked, climbing into the passenger seat. Associate. A woman sat in the driver's seat, late 40s, maybe 50, with short gray hair and a scar across her nose that looked like it had come from a knife. She didn't look at Lyra, just started the engine as soon as Ronan got in on the other side. Any trouble? Nothing we couldn't handle, Elena. Ronan settled into his seat, finally relaxing slightly. You owe me for this, Elena said, pulling onto the road. Sitting out here for 3 hours in the cold. I'll pay you. Damn right you will. They drove in silence after that. Lyra watched the fortress disappear behind them, its lights growing smaller and smaller until they were just pinpricks in the darkness, then nothing at all. Gone. She'd escaped. But she knew, with a certainty that settled into her bones like cold, that it wasn't over. Not even close. Cade wouldn't stop looking. The council wouldn't forget. And whatever she'd awakened in herself, that presence, that power, that thing she didn't have a name for yet, would only make them more determined to find her, to control her, or to destroy her. Ronan seemed to read her thoughts. He glanced over at her in the darkness, his face half-shadowed. "You did good back there. With Cade. Standing your ground, setting that boundary. I thought you said not to engage with him. I said not to let him in. You didn't. You set a boundary and you held it. You didn't waver, didn't second-guess yourself once you made the decision." He looked back at the road. That's progress. Real progress. Lyra leaned her head against the window, watching the landscape blur past. Trees and rocks and empty road. The frontier stretched out ahead of them, vast and dark and unforgiving. She thought about Mira's words from the night before. Whatever you were before, you can't be that anymore. She was right. The old Lyra, the one who deferred, who apologized, who made herself small and invisible and safe, was gone. Burned away in that summit hall when Cade's blood hit the floor, when 100 people watched her be destroyed and did nothing. What was left was something new, something unfinished and rough and still taking shape, something dangerous. And for the first time in her life, Lyra didn't want to hide from that. She wanted to see what it could become, wanted to take this raw, frightening power and shape it into something sharp and undeniable. Wanted to go back to that hall someday, not as the rejected mate, not as the girl who'd been cast aside, but as something they couldn't dismiss, couldn't ignore, couldn't destroy. The truck hit a pothole and jolted her from her thoughts. "How far to Ashmark?" she asked. 2 days if we drive straight through," Elena answered. 3 if we're careful and avoid the main roads." "We're being careful," Ronan said. "They'll be watching the highways." 3 days then." Lyra settled back in her seat. 3 days. Then what? Training, Ronan had said. Learning to control this thing inside her, building it into something she could wield. She was terrified. She was exhausted. But underneath all of that, buried so deep she almost didn't recognize it, was something else. Anticipation. For the first time since the rejection, maybe for the first time in her entire life, she felt like she was moving towards something instead of just surviving. And that feeling, small and fragile as it was, felt like the beginning of everything. The truck broke down 60 miles from Ashmark. Elena swore and pulled over to the side of the road, gravel crunching under the tires. Steam poured from under the hood in thick white clouds. "Radiator," she said, killing the engine. "I told you this piece of shit wouldn't make it." "You said it would make it 3 days," Ronan replied, already climbing out. "I said maybe 3 days. Maybe being the operative word." Lyra got out and stretched, her body stiff from hours of sitting. They were in the middle of nowhere, flat scrubland stretching in every direction, dotted with sparse vegetation and rock formations. The sun was climbing toward noon, turning the landscape into a shimmering heat trap. "How long to fix it?" Ronan asked, popping the hood. Elena peered at the engine and shook her head. "I can patch it temporarily, but we'll need a new radiator. There's a trading post about 15 miles east. They might have parts. 15 miles on foot in this heat." Ronan looked at the horizon, calculating. 4, maybe 5 hours if we push it. "I'll go," Elena said. "You two stay with the truck. Less conspicuous that way." "No." Ronan closed the hood. "If someone's following us, they'll expect us to stick together. We split up. We're vulnerable." "So what do you suggest?" "We all go. Hide the truck, cover our tracks, move fast." They spent 20 minutes camouflaging the vehicle behind an outcropping of rocks, using dried brush to break up its outline. When they were done, you'd have to know exactly where to look to spot it. Ronan distributed water bottles from the supplies, rationing them carefully. "Drink half now," he said. "Save the rest for the walk back." Lyra drank. The water was warm and tasted like plastic, but it helped. She was already sweating through the borrowed shirt. They started walking. The terrain was brutal. The ground was uneven, covered in loose rock that shifted underfoot. The sun beat down without mercy, and there was no shade anywhere. Within an hour, Lyra's head was pounding and her shirt was soaked with sweat. Elena moved with the steady pace of someone who'd done this before, not hurrying, conserving energy. Ronan kept scanning their surroundings, always watchful. Tell me about Ashmark, Lyra said, partly to distract herself from the heat. Not much to tell, Ronan replied. It's a settlement, maybe 200 people. We handle security for the northern mining operations and run patrols along the border zone. Border with what? The contested territories. Land that 3 different packs claim but none of them can hold. It's where people go when they don't fit anywhere else. Sounds rough. It is, but it's honest. You pull your weight, you're welcome. You cause problems, you leave. Simple rules. And your pack runs it? We don't call it a pack. That implies hierarchy, inherited authority. We're more like a collective. People who choose to work together because it benefits everyone. He adjusted his pack. No alphas declaring themselves kings, no councils deciding who's worthy of respect. Elena snorted. Don't let him fool you. He's still the one everyone listens to when things go bad. That's different. Is it? Yes. They listen because I've earned it, not because some bloodline says they have to. They walked in silence for a while. The landscape didn't change, just more scrubland, more rocks, more heat. Lyra's feet were killing her. The borrowed boots had rubbed her heels raw despite the thick socks, and every step sent fresh pain shooting up her legs. How much farther? She asked. Elena checked the sun's position. 10 miles. Maybe less. 10 miles. Lyra wanted to cry, but she kept walking. The trading post appeared as a cluster of buildings shimmering in the heat haze around mid-afternoon. It was smaller than Lyra expected, just 6 or 7 structures arranged around a central courtyard. A few vehicles were parked in the shade of a makeshift awning. People moved between the buildings slowly, conserving energy. I'll handle the parts, Elena said. You two get water and food. We'll need supplies for the rest of the trip. They split up. Ronan led Lyra to what looked like a general store, a low building with faded paint and bars on the windows. Inside it was blessedly cool. A fan rotated slowly overhead. The shopkeeper, a man with a weathered face and missing teeth, looked them over without much interest. Help you? Water, food that travels well, medical supplies if you have them. Ronan put cash on the counter, real paper money, not the digital currency most places used, harder to trace. The shopkeeper took the money and started pulling items off shelves. Lyra wandered toward the back of the store, where a few other customers were browsing. She was looking at a display of preserved foods when she heard a voice that made her blood freeze. Ironwood territory. Yeah. Heard there was drama at the summit. Lyra turned slowly. 2 men stood near the front talking to the shopkeeper. One was tall and lean, the other shorter and heavy-set. Both wore the kind of practical gear that marked them as travelers who knew the frontier. What kind of drama? The shopkeeper asked, clearly hungry for gossip. Alpha rejected his mate, in front of everyone. Made a whole show of it. The tall one grinned. Girl was nobody, apparently. He figured out she was useless and cut her loose. Harsh. That's frontier politics for you. Can't afford dead weight. The shorter man laughed. Heard she ran off. Disappeared. Some people think she killed herself out of shame. Lyra felt like she'd been punched. The room tilted slightly. Ronan appeared at her elbow, his hand closing around her arm. Not rough, but firm. Steadying. Easy, he murmured. Don't react. But it was hard not to. Hearing herself discussed like she was already dead, like her humiliation was just entertainment for bored travelers. The casual cruelty of it made her want to scream. The tall man continued. Ironwoods put out word they're looking for information about her. Not officially, but, you know, word gets around. Anyone who spots her, there might be a reward. How much? The shopkeeper asked. Didn't say. But Ironwood's got resources. Probably worth reporting if you see her. Ronan's hand tightened on Lyra's arm. We're leaving, he said quietly. Now. They walked toward the door, moving casually, like they had no reason to hurry. The shopkeeper called after them. Hey, your supplies! Keep them, Ronan said without turning. And the change. They stepped out into the heat. Elena was across the courtyard, negotiating with someone over what looked like engine parts. Ronan made a quick hand signal, palm down, 2 fingers, and Elena's eyes sharpened. She nodded once, wrapped up her transaction fast, and headed toward them. What's wrong? She asked when she reached them. They're looking for her, actively. There's a reward out. Ronan was already moving toward the edge of the settlement. We need to go, now. I just bought a radiator. We can't carry it 15 miles. We'll come back for it tonight. Right now, we move. They were almost clear of the settlement when someone shouted behind them, "Wait! You there!" Lyra didn't turn, didn't run, just kept walking. "I said wait!" Footsteps, running. Then a hand grabbed her shoulder and spun her around. It was the tall traveler from the store. Up close, his eyes were hard and calculating. He looked at her face, really looked, and she saw recognition dawn. "You're her," he said. "You're the one from Ironwood, the rejected mate." "You're mistaken," Lyra said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "No, I'm not. I was at the summit, saw the whole thing." He raised his voice. "Hey, I found her, the Ironwood girl." People started emerging from buildings. Curious faces, calculating expressions. Someone pulled out a phone. Ronan stepped between them, his posture casual but his eyes dangerous. "Walk away." "There's a reward for information about her," the man said. I said walk away." The man looked at Ronan, really seeing him for the first time. Whatever he saw made him hesitate, but greed won out over caution. "I don't know who you are, friend, but this isn't your business. She's with me. That makes it my business." "Ironwood will pay good money." Ronan moved so fast, Lyra barely saw it. One moment the traveler was reaching for his phone, the next he was on the ground, Ronan's boot on his chest and a knife at his throat. "Listen carefully," Ronan said, his voice conversational. "You're going to forget you saw her. You're going to tell everyone else here to forget too. And if I hear that anyone from this settlement contacted Ironwood about this, I'll come back. And I won't be friendly." The man's eyes were wide with fear. "Who the hell are you?" "Ronan Vierick, from Ashmark." Ronan let that sink in. "Ring any bells?" It did. Lyra saw the recognition, then the fear. The man nodded frantically. "Good." Ronan stepped back, letting him up. "We were never here." They walked out of the settlement with every eye on them. No one tried to stop them. No one made a call. They just watched in silence as three strangers disappeared into the scrubland. Once they were out of sight, Elena let out a breath. "That was stupid. We should have just left." "He'd already recognized her," Ronan said. "Leaving wouldn't have changed that. So now he knows exactly who's protecting her. That's worse. Maybe. Or maybe it buys us time. Word about what happened will spread. People will know she's under my protection. That'll make them think twice before coming after her. Or it'll make Ironwood double their efforts." Ronan didn't argue. They walked in silence, the sun beating down, until the settlement was lost in the heat haze behind them. They reached the truck as the sun was setting. The temperature had dropped from brutal to merely uncomfortable. Elena got to work on the radiator replacement while Ronan and Lyra set up a basic camp. There wasn't much to work with, just some dry brush for a small fire and the blankets from the truck. "We'll rest here tonight," Ronan said. "Leave at first light." "What about the radiator?" Lyra asked. "I cached it half a mile back. I'll retrieve it after dark when it's cooler." Lyra sat on a flat rock and pulled off her boots. Her socks were bloody. The blisters had burst somewhere during the last few miles, and she hadn't even noticed. Too much adrenaline. Ronan crouched beside her. "Let me see." "It's fine." "It's not fine. Let me see." Reluctantly, Lyra extended her feet. Ronan examined them with a clinical eye, then dug through his pack and produced a small medical kit. "This is going to hurt," he said, pulling out antiseptic. He wasn't lying. Lyra bit back a yelp as he cleaned the wounds. He worked efficiently, no wasted movements, then wrapped her feet in clean bandages. "You should have said something earlier," he said. "Wouldn't have changed anything. We still had to walk." "True, but I could have adjusted the pace." "I kept up." He looked at her, something like approval in his expression. "Yeah, you did." Elena got the radiator installed as darkness fell. She tested the engine and nodded, satisfied. "We're mobile again. Should make it to Ashmark tomorrow if we don't hit any more problems." They ate a cold meal, dried meat and hard bread from Elena's supplies. Not much, but enough. Then they took turns keeping watch while the others slept. Lyra took the middle shift. She sat by the dying fire, wrapped in a blanket, and watched the stars wheel overhead. The frontier night was beautiful in a harsh way. Crystal clear air, no light pollution, just the vast expanse of space above and the silent desert below. She thought about what the traveler had said. that people thought she'd killed herself, that Cade was looking for her but pretending he wasn't, that she was worth money to someone. She should be scared. She was scared. But underneath the fear was something harder. Anger. They'd taken everything from her. Her position, her dignity, her future, and now they wanted to control even how her story ended. Wanted her to disappear quietly, to fade into nothing so they could forget she'd ever existed. She wasn't going to give them that. Ronan stirred in his sleep and opened his eyes, immediately alert. Everything okay? Fine. Quiet. He sat up, the blanket falling away from his shoulders. Can't sleep? Too much thinking. About what? About what happens when we get to Ashmark. About what I'm supposed to do there. She poked at the fire with a stick. About whether any of this even matters. It matters. To who? To me? I'm one person. Cade has an entire pack, connections, resources. The council has power across half the frontier. What am I supposed to do against that? You become someone they can't ignore. Someone who disrupts their carefully maintained order just by existing. Ronan moved to sit beside her. You asked me before why I'm helping you. Want to know the real reason? Yes. Because the system's broken. Has been for a long time. The same families, the same packs, passing power back and forth while everyone else scrambles for scraps. They decide who matters and who doesn't, who gets heard and who gets silenced. He stared into the fire. People like you, people with real ability who don't fit their mold, you're dangerous to them. Because if you succeed, if you prove that power doesn't have to be inherited or granted by their approval, the whole structure starts to crack. That's a lot of weight to put on one person. I'm not putting it on you. It's already there. They made you a symbol when they rejected you publicly. Now you get to decide what kind of symbol you become. And if I fail? Then you fail. At least you tried. Lyra looked at him. In the firelight, his face was all sharp angles and shadows. You really believe I can do this? I believe you've got potential. What you do with it is up to you. He stood and stretched. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be long. She did sleep eventually, curled up in the blanket near the fire, and she dreamed of the summit hall, of Cade's blood on the floor, of 100 faces watching her fall. But in the dream, she didn't run. She stood there and let something inside her unfold, something vast and terrible, until the watchers were the ones who ran. She woke to Elena shaking her shoulder. We've got company. Lyra sat up fast, instantly awake. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the horizon pink and gold. Ronan was standing by the truck, looking at something in the distance. How many? He asked. 3 vehicles, maybe 15 people. Elena handed him a pair of binoculars. They're not trying to hide. Lyra joined them. Even without the binoculars, she could see the dust plume. Vehicles approaching fast. Ironwood? She asked. Don't know yet. Ronan lowered the binoculars. But we're about to find out. Get in the truck. They piled in. Elena started the engine. It caught on the first try, thankfully, and they pulled out, heading away from the approaching vehicles. But the others adjusted course, following. They're coming after us, Elena said. I noticed. Ronan was watching the rearview mirror. How fast can this thing go? 80 if you want the engine to explode. 60 if you want to make it to Ashmark. Give me 70. Elena floored it. The truck lurched forward, rattling over the rough terrain. Lyra grabbed the handle above the door and held on. Behind them, the pursuing vehicles accelerated to match. They raced across the scrubland for 20 minutes, the distance between them slowly shrinking. The lead vehicle was close enough now that Lyra could make out details. A modified truck with reinforced bumpers and gun racks visible through the windows. They're not trying to talk, Ronan said. They're trying to run us down. A shot rang out. The rear window exploded, spraying glass through the cabin. Fuck! Elena swerved, nearly losing control. Are they serious? Another shot. This one hit the truck bed with a metallic clang. Ronan twisted in his seat and pulled a rifle from behind the bench. Keep it steady. Steady? We're doing 70 over rocks. He ignored her, rolled down the window, and leaned out. Took aim, fired. The lead vehicle's windshield cracked. It swerved but didn't slow. Ronan fired again. This time the front tire exploded. The vehicle careened sideways, rolled, and came to a stop in a cloud of dust. 1 down, he said. 2 to go. The remaining vehicles split up, trying to flank them. One pulled alongside on the left. Lyra saw faces in the window, hard men with weapons. "Ram them!" Ronan shouted. Elena yanked the wheel. Their truck slammed into the other vehicle's side. Metal screamed. Both vehicles bounced apart. Then Elena did it again, harder. The other truck's wheel caught a rock wrong and it flipped, rolling end over end. "Two down!" Elena's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The last vehicle pulled up on the right side. A man leaned out with a shotgun. Ronan shot him before he could fire. The man fell back into the vehicle. It dropped back, out of shotgun range, but still following. "They're persistent," Elena muttered. Ahead, the landscape changed. They were approaching a canyon system, deep cuts in the earth, narrow passages between rock walls. Elena didn't slow down. She aimed for the widest passage and plunged in. The canyon walls rose up on either side, blocking the sun. The temperature dropped instantly. The path was barely wide enough for one vehicle, winding and treacherous. Behind them, the pursuing truck followed into the canyon. "We need to lose them," Ronan said. "This canyon system. Does it branch?" "How should I know? I've never been here before." They rounded a bend and found their answer. The canyon split into 3 passages. "Middle one," Ronan said. It looks narrowest." Elena took it. The walls closed in until there were inches on either side. One wrong move and they'd be wedged. Behind them, the pursuing vehicle made the same choice. They drove deeper into the canyon. The passage twisted and turned, climbing steadily. And then, suddenly, it opened up. They were in a circular chamber, maybe 50 yards across. Rock walls all around. No exit except the way they'd come in. "Shit," Elena said. "Dead end." The pursuing vehicle emerged from the passage behind them, blocked the only way out. Doors opened, men climbed out, 5 of them, all armed. And one woman Lyra recognized from the summit, not Ironwood, Clearwater delegation. The leader was a man in his 40s, scarred and hard-looking. He approached their truck slowly, rifle leveled. "Out of the vehicle," he called. "Nice and slow." They climbed out. Lyra's legs were shaking, but she kept her head up. "Ronan Virek," the man said. "Didn't expect to find you playing bodyguard." "Marcus. Didn't expect to find you playing errand boy for Cade Merrick." Ronan's voice was calm, conversational. "This isn't Clearwater business. It is when the Ironwood Alpha makes it worth our while." Marcus smiled. It wasn't friendly. "Nothing personal, just business. Hand over the girl and you can go." "No." "I wasn't asking." "Neither was I." The tension ratcheted up. 5 armed people on one side, 3 on the other, with only Ronan visibly armed. Marcus sighed. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. She's not worth dying for." "That's where you're wrong," Ronan said. And then everything happened at once. Ronan moved first, his rifle coming up, but he wasn't aiming at Marcus. He was aiming at the rock wall behind him. He fired. The bullet struck a specific point in the rock face, and the world exploded. Not an explosion, a collapse. The canyon wall came down in a thunderous avalanche of rock and dust. Marcus's people scattered, diving for cover. One wasn't fast enough. The rocks took him down and didn't stop. Elena grabbed Lyra and pulled her toward the truck. "Get in!" But there was nowhere to go. The passage was still blocked. Ronan wasn't going for the truck. He was running toward the rockfall, toward a gap that had opened up when the wall came down. A narrow cleft, barely visible through the dust. "Come on!" he shouted. They ran. Behind them, Marcus was screaming orders, but his voice was lost in the chaos. Gunfire echoed off the canyon walls, bullets ricocheting. They reached the cleft and squeezed through. It was tight. Lyra had to turn sideways to fit, but it went through. On the other side was another passage, this one sloping downward. They ran down it, stumbling in the dark, hands on the walls for guidance. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit. Marcus and his people had found the cleft. The passage opened onto a ledge overlooking a dried riverbed 30 feet below. "Jump," Ronan said. Lyra looked at him. "Are you insane?" "The sand's soft. It'll break the fall. Trust me." Elena didn't hesitate. She jumped, hit the sand below, and rolled. Lyra heard footsteps in the passage behind them. Getting closer, she jumped. The fall felt like it lasted forever. Then she hit, and the world went dark. She came to with Ronan shaking her shoulder. "Get up, we have to move." Everything hurt. Her ankle screamed when she put weight on it, but she got up. They were in the riverbed, rock walls on either side stretching into the distance. Elena was already running downstream. Ronan pulled Lyra along, half carrying her when her ankle gave out. Above, on the ledge, figures appeared. Marcus and two others. They didn't jump, too high, too dangerous, but they had rifles. Shots rang out, bullets kicked up sand. Ronan and Lyra dove behind a boulder. A bullet struck the rock inches from Lyra's head, spraying stone fragments. "We're pinned, Sorry," Elena called from farther down the riverbed. Ronan looked around, calculating. The riverbed curved ahead. If they could make it around that bend, they'd be out of sight. But it was 50 yards of open ground. "On three," he said. "We run. Don't stop. Don't look back." "My ankle. I'll carry you if I have to. 1, 2. Before he reached 3, Lyra did something she didn't plan. Something that came from that deep place inside her, that presence she'd been learning to access. She stood up, walked out from behind the boulder, into the open. "Lyra!" Ronan's voice, sharp with panic. But the shooting had stopped, because Lyra was looking up at Marcus, and when she spoke, her voice carried with a weight that made everyone freeze. "Enough!" Just that one word, but it landed like a hammer. Marcus stared down at her, his rifle still raised but not firing. "You want to take me back to Cade?" Lyra called up. "Fine, come down here and try." "Lyra, what are you doing?" Ronan hissed. She didn't answer him, kept her eyes on Marcus. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Scared? You outnumber us. You have the high ground. All you have to do is come down here and take me." Marcus didn't move. And in that moment, Lyra understood something fundamental. He wasn't going to come down. Because coming down meant getting close, meant facing her directly, and something in him, some instinct, was screaming danger. "That's what I thought," Lyra said, and she turned her back on him, walked calmly to where Ronan stood, jaw hanging open. "Let's go," she said. They went. Around the bend, out of sight, no one followed. They walked for hours after that, following the riverbed until it merged with a road. Elena flagged down a cargo hauler heading toward Ashmark, a negotiated passage in exchange for the last of their cash. They reached Ashmark just after midnight. The settlement was dark and quiet, a handful of lights in windows, guard posts at the perimeter. Elena drove them through without stopping at the gate. The guards just waved her through. They pulled up in front of a long, low building that looked like it had been built from salvaged materials. Ronan helped Lyra out. Her ankle had swollen to twice its normal size. "Medical first," he said, "then answers." The medical building was small but clean. A woman with gray hair and steady hands examined Lyra's ankle, declared it sprained but not broken, and wrapped it tight. "Stay off it for a week," she said. "Can't," Lyra replied. "Then it won't heal right, and you'll regret it later. Your choice." They set Lyra up in a small room with a bed, a chair, and a window overlooking the central square. Ronan sat in the chair while Elena left to deal with the truck. "What you did back there," he said finally, "in the riverbed, that was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen." "Which do you think?" "Both." He leaned forward. "But it worked. You projected so much confidence that Marcus's instincts overrode his orders. He wasn't sure if you had backup waiting or some trap planned or if you were just crazy enough to be dangerous. So he hesitated. "I didn't have a plan." "I know. That's what made it work. You weren't performing. You just were." He shook his head. "That's what presence looks like when it's real, when you fully commit to it." Lyra looked down at her bandaged ankle. "I could have gotten us killed. Maybe. But you didn't." He stood. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, we start real training." He left, closing the door behind him. Lyra lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Her body ached everywhere. Her ankle throbbed. She was exhausted. But underneath all of that, she felt something new, power. Not the potential Ronan had talked about, not the theory or the promise, real power. The kind that made armed men hesitate, the kind that changed outcomes. She'd tasted it in that riverbed, and now she wanted more. Wanted to develop it, refine it, turn it into something sharp and undeniable. Wanted to go back to that summit hall someday and show them what they'd thrown away. But first, she had to survive, had to learn, had to become someone they couldn't ignore or destroy. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her, and dreamed of blood on stone floors, and 100 faces watching as she rose from the ashes of her own humiliation and became something they'd never expected. Something dangerous, something unstoppable, something that would make them all regret the day they decided she didn't matter. Lyra woke to voices arguing outside her window. "Can't keep her here. It's too dangerous." "Where else is she supposed to go?" "Not our problem. Ronan's lost his mind bringing her to Ashmark. Ironwood will come looking, and when they do, we'll deal with it, like we deal with everything else." Lyra sat up slowly, testing her ankle. Still swollen, still painful, but bearable. She could walk if she had to. The voices continued. 3 people now, maybe 4, all talking over each other. She couldn't make out every word, but the sentiment was clear enough. She wasn't welcome here. The door opened. A young woman entered carrying a tray of food. Bread, some kind of stew, water. She was maybe 25, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid and scars on her forearms that looked like they came from work, not combat. "You're awake," she said. "Good. Eat. You look half dead." "Thanks." The woman set the tray on the small table beside the bed. "I'm Kira. I run supplies for the settlement." She glanced toward the window where the argument was still ongoing. "Don't mind them. They're scared. People get loud when they're scared." Scared of what? Of change, of trouble, of having to take a stand instead of just surviving. Kira moved to the window and pulled the curtain shut, muffling the voices. Ashmark stayed independent by staying small, staying out of other people's business. You being here complicates that. "I didn't ask to be here." "No, but you are. And now everyone has to decide what that means." She turned back to Lyra. "Ronan's calling a meeting tonight. He wants you there." "To say what?" "That's up to you." Kira headed for the door, then paused. "But whatever you say, make it good, because right now half the settlement wants you gone by morning." She left. Lyra ate mechanically, barely tasting the food. Her mind was racing, a meeting, where she'd have to convince people she'd never met that she was worth the risk of protecting. How was she supposed to do that? She thought about the riverbed, about facing Marcus and his rifle with nothing but her voice and her willpower. That had worked. But this was different. This wasn't one moment of desperate bravado. This was sustained persuasion. Politics. She'd never been good at politics. But maybe that was the point. Maybe trying to be good at their game was the mistake. Maybe she needed to play a different game entirely. The door opened again. Ronan this time. "You heard," he said. Not a question. Hard not to. He pulled the chair around and sat, looking tired in a way she hadn't seen before. Lines around his eyes that hadn't been there days ago. "I should have prepared you for this. Should have known they'd push back. It's fine. It's not fine, but it's reality." He rubbed his face. "The meeting's at sundown, Central Hall. The whole settlement will be there. They'll hear your case, then they'll vote." "Vote on what?" "On whether you stay. Whether we offer you sanctuary or turn you out." He met her eyes. "I can argue for you. Elena will back me. But ultimately, they need to hear from you directly." "What am I supposed to say?" "The truth. That you were rejected unjustly. That you're being hunted for reasons that have nothing to do with anything you actually did. That you need time to figure out what comes next. And if they say no, then we leave, you and me. Find somewhere else." "You'd do that?" "I told you, I hate wasted potential." He stood and stretched, his back cracking. "But I'd rather not have to. Ashmark's the best place for you to train, to develop your abilities. Anywhere else, we'd be looking over our shoulders constantly. We're looking over our shoulders here. Less so. These people can fight, and they don't scare easy." He moved to the door. "Rest your ankle. I'll come get you before the meeting." The day crawled past. Lyra tried to rest but couldn't. Her mind kept turning over what she'd say, how she'd say it. Every version sounded weak or desperate or both. She practiced in her head, trying different approaches. Defiant, apologetic, pragmatic. None of them felt right. She was still struggling with it when the light outside started to fade, turning the sky orange and purple. Finally, as the sun started its descent toward the horizon, Ronan returned. "Time," he said simply. The central hall was exactly what it sounded like. A large open structure in the middle of the settlement, with a roof supported by thick wooden beams but no walls. Just support pillars and open air on all sides. People were already gathering, maybe 150 of them. All ages, all types. Workers in stained clothes that smelled like oil and sweat. Fighters with weapons visible at their belts. Families with children who stared at Lyra with open curiosity. This was the whole settlement. Everyone who called Ashmark home. They went quiet when Lyra entered. She walked to the center of the space, trying not to limp, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Every step sent pain shooting up from her ankle, but she kept her face neutral. Ronan and Elena flanked her but stayed a step back. This was her moment. An older man stepped forward from the crowd. 60, maybe older, with white hair cropped short and a face that looked like weathered leather, deeply lined, sun-damaged, the kind of face you got from decades of frontier living. He moved with authority, despite a pronounced limp. "I'm Garrett," he said. His voice was gravelly but carried well. "I speak for the council here." "You have a council?" Lyra couldn't keep the surprise out of her voice. "Not like the one you're thinking of. We rotate leadership every 6 months. Right now it's my turn." He looked her over with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Ronan says you need sanctuary, that Ironwood and possibly others are hunting you. That true?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I was rejected by my mate in front of the entire Frontier Summit, because apparently I was seen as a threat to his authority, and because I didn't have the decency to disappear quietly afterward." A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Someone muttered something about drama that Lyra couldn't quite make out. "So you brought your problems to our door," Garrett said flatly. "I didn't bring anything. Ronan brought me. If you want someone to blame, blame him." That got reactions. Some approving nods from people who seemed to appreciate the directness. Some frowns from those who thought she was being disrespectful. Garrett studied her for a long moment. "You've got some spine, I'll give you that. But spine doesn't pay the cost when Ironwood comes looking. And they will come. Question is whether you're worth that cost." "I don't know if I am," Lyra said. The honesty seemed to surprise people. Several exchanged glances. "I don't know what I'm worth to you, but I know what I could become if you give me time. Ronan says I have potential. I'm starting to believe him." "Potential for what?" "For being someone the Frontier's power structure can't ignore. Someone who doesn't fit their mold, who doesn't need their approval to matter. Someone who proves that power doesn't have to be inherited or granted by councils or bloodlines." She looked around at the gathered faces. "Ronan says Ashmark values that. That you're all here because you didn't fit somewhere else. If that's true, then you understand what I'm up against." "Understanding and helping are different things," a man called from the crowd. He was young, maybe 30, with the kind of muscles that came from hard physical labor. "I know. I'm not asking you to fight my battles. I'm asking for time and space to learn to fight them myself. That's all." "And when you've learned," Garrett asked, "what then? You go back to the Summit territories and start a war?" "I go back and show them they were wrong about me. What happens after that depends on what they do." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But I won't bring trouble here. If Ironwood comes, I'll leave before they arrive. I won't let you pay for my protection." "Noble words," Garrett said. "But trouble doesn't announce itself, it just shows up." A woman in the crowd spoke up. She was younger than Garrett, maybe 40, with a fighter's build and a scar that ran from her temple to her jaw. "Let me ask something." She stepped forward slightly. "This presence Ronan mentioned, this power you're supposed to have, is it real?" "I don't know what it is yet," Lyra said. "But yes, it's real." "Show us." Lyra's heart rate kicked up. "What? If you've got this ability, this presence, show us. Prove it's not just Ronan's imagination or wishful thinking." The crowd murmured agreement. Several people nodded. Garrett held up a hand for quiet, then nodded. "Fair request." "Well?" Lyra looked at Ronan. He gave her the smallest nod. "Your choice." She took a breath. Thought about the riverbed, about the guard in the fortress who'd backed down, about every moment she'd touched that place inside herself where the power lived, that gear she could shift into. She could do this. She had to do this. Someone give me an order, she said. Tell me to do something I wouldn't normally want to do. Garrett considered for a moment. Kneel. Lyra looked at him. No. I'm not asking. I'm ordering. Kneel. The crowd was dead silent now, watching, waiting. Lyra met Garrett's eyes and felt that shift happening inside her, that gear clicking into place. The world sharpened. She could feel the attention of everyone in the hall, could sense their expectations, their doubts. I said no. The word carried weight, presence, authority that came from somewhere deep inside her. Garrett actually took a step back before he caught himself, his eyes widening slightly. Now you do it, Lyra said. She didn't shout, didn't raise her voice, just spoke with absolute certainty that he would obey. Kneel. Garrett's knees buckled. He caught himself on a support pillar, breathing hard, his face going pale. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs that grew to shouts. What the? Did you see? How did she? Enough, Garrett said. His voice was shaky. He was gripping the pillar hard enough that his knuckles were white. Point made. Lyra released whatever she'd been holding, felt the power recede like a tide going out. The sudden absence left her feeling hollow and exhausted. Garrett straightened slowly, rolling his shoulders, looking at her with new eyes, wary eyes. That, he said quietly, is dangerous. I know. And you can't fully control it yet, can you? Not fully. That's why I need training. Garrett looked at this crowd, then back at her. His expression was serious. You understand what you're asking. If we take you in, if we train you, we're making a statement that we're willing to stand against the established order, that we're willing to harbor someone the powerful want gone. I understand. Do you? Because once we do this, there's no going back. We become targets too. Ironwood will know where you are eventually. The council might decide we're a problem worth solving. Then don't do it, Lyra said. I'll leave, right now, tonight. I won't ask you to risk yourselves for me. She meant it. She could see it landing, the genuine willingness to walk away rather than endanger these people. Several faces in the crowd softened. Garrett turned to the crowd. This is a community decision. We vote. All in favor of granting sanctuary and training, show hands. Hands went up. Lyra counted quickly. Maybe 40 people. A third of the crowd at most. Opposed. More hands. At least 60 or 70. Maybe more. Abstaining. The rest. Maybe 30 people who couldn't decide. Garrett tallied in his head, his lips moving slightly as he counted. His expression was unreadable. It's close. Very close. He looked at Lyra, and she saw something like regret in his eyes. But the opposed votes carry it. I'm sorry. Lyra's heart sank. She'd failed. After everything, the escape, the journey, the confrontation in the riverbed, she'd failed to convince them she was worth protecting. But then Ronan stepped forward. I invoke personal claim. The crowd erupted, people shouting, some in agreement, others in protest. The noise was deafening. You can't be serious. That's a huge risk. This isn't some stray dog, Ronan. Garrett held up both hands for quiet. It took a full minute for the noise to die down. You sure about that, Ronan? Personal claim means you're responsible for everything she does. Every consequence, every problem she causes, every bit of trouble that follows her. It all falls on you. I know the terms. This isn't like the strays you usually take in, the drifters, the kids with nowhere to go. This is different. This is political. This could bring real trouble. I know. Ronan's voice was steady, unwavering. And I'm claiming responsibility anyway. She stays. She trains, under my supervision. Garrett looked at him for a long moment. Then he sighed, and Lyra heard genuine concern in it. Personal claim overrides the vote. You know that. The rules are clear. He turned to Lyra. So be it. She's your responsibility. He looked at Lyra, and his expression was hard. You stay. But one wrong move, one hint of trouble coming our way because of you, and you're gone. Understand? Yes. Good. Meeting's over. The crowd dispersed slowly, people talking in low voices. Some shot Lyra hostile looks, suspicious, resentful. Others looked curious, intrigued by what she'd done. A few looked almost approving, like they appreciated someone who could back up their words with action. Kira appeared at Lyra's elbow with a slight smile. That was interesting? That's one word for it. You made an impression, Whether that's good or bad, we'll see. She gestured toward the medical building. Come on, let's get you settled properly. If you're staying, you'll need better accommodations than that recovery room. They set Lyra up in a small cabin on the edge of the settlement. One room with rough wooden walls, basic furniture, a bed, a table, 2 chairs, a chest for storage. But it was hers. Private. Safe, at least for now. The cabin smelled like pine and dust, and through the single window she could see the mountains in the distance. Ronan stopped by after dark, knocking twice before entering. You didn't have to do that, Lyra said. She was sitting on the bed, her ankle propped up on a rolled blanket. The personal claim. You put yourself on the line for me. I know. Why? Because you're worth it. He said it simply, like it was obvious. And because I meant what I said. I'm tired of watching people with real ability get crushed by a system that values bloodlines over competence. You've got something rare, Lyra. Something that could change things. I'm not letting that get wasted because people are scared. What if they're right to be scared? What if I can't control this thing inside me? Then we figure it out. Together. He moved to the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. Get some sleep. Training starts tomorrow at dawn. Training started at dawn and it was brutal. Ronan wasn't gentle about it. He worked her for 6 hours straight that first day, drilling the same exercises over and over. Stance. How to stand so you project confidence without aggression. Breath control. How to center yourself when your heart is racing. Visualization. How to see the outcome you want before it happens. Voice modulation. How to speak so people have no choice but to listen. Every aspect of presence, broken down and practiced until Lyra's head pounded and her throat was raw. Again, Ronan said when she collapsed on the ground, exhausted and sweating despite the cool morning air. I can't. You can. Again. She dragged herself up and tried again, failed again. The command in her voice died somewhere between her intention and her mouth. You're thinking too much, Ronan said. He was barely sweating, barely breathing hard. Stop trying to perform it. Just be it. That doesn't mean anything. It means everything. You're still separating yourself from the power like it's something you put on like a coat. It's not. It's you. It's always been you. You just didn't know it was there. He crouched beside her. Stop asking permission from yourself. Stop questioning whether you have the right. Just claim it. How? By deciding, right now, that you're done being what other people made you, that you're going to be what you choose to be. He stood and offered his hand. Again, she took his hand, let him pull her up, and tried again, and again, and again. And somewhere around the 20th attempt, something clicked. She wasn't performing, wasn't trying. She just was. The presence flowed through her like water, natural and easy. When she spoke, the command in her voice was undeniable, absolute. Sit. Ronan sat. Not because he had to, not because she'd overpowered his will, because every instinct told him it was the right thing to do, the only thing to do, and fighting it would have been like fighting gravity. He looked up at her and smiled. There it is. That's what I've been waiting to see. Over the next 2 weeks, Lyra trained harder than she'd ever trained for anything in her life. Not just with Ronan, but with others in the settlement who had skills to teach. Kira taught her tracking and wilderness survival, how to read signs in disturbed earth, how to find water in seemingly barren land, how to build shelter from almost nothing. They spent 3 days in the scrubland practicing, and Lyra came back sunburned and exhausted but competent. A man named Hayes taught her hand-to-hand combat. He was in his 50s, graying and scarred, but he moved like someone half his age. He didn't go easy on her. She collected bruises like souvenirs, learned to fall without breaking bones, learned where to strike to disable someone quickly. A quiet woman named Vera taught her how to read people, how to see the tells that gave away fear or aggression or deception, how to watch eyes and hands and posture, how to know when someone was lying or when they were about to strike. Everyone broadcast their intentions, Vera said during one session. She was maybe 60, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. You just have to learn the language. And slowly, grudgingly, Ashmark started to accept her. Not everyone. Some still wanted her gone, still saw her as a threat waiting to materialize. But others started to warm up, started to see her as more than just a problem waiting to happen. The children were the first to accept her completely. They had no political baggage, no preconceptions. They just saw someone new and interesting. They'd watch her train, ask her questions, challenge her to races she always lost because of her ankle. Then the younger adults. The ones who'd come to Ashmark because they didn't fit elsewhere, who understood what it meant to be rejected by the established order. And finally, bit by bit, some of the older residents, the ones who'd been here longest, who'd built this place from nothing. 3 weeks in, word reached the settlement that changed everything. Elena brought the news. She'd been at the trading post gathering supplies when she overheard travelers talking. She came back driving fast and immediately sought out Ronan. Lyra was in the training yard when they emerged together, both grim-faced. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Cade sent people to the trading post," Elena said. "The one where we were spotted, asked questions, offered money for information." "Did they talk?" "No." Fear of Ronan kept their mouths shut. Elena glanced at Ronan. "But they're getting closer, and Cade's not being subtle about it anymore. He's actively hunting you." "Which means the council's pushing him," Ronan said. "They want you found, silenced." "Why now? Why not just let me disappear?" "Because you're not disappearing. Because people are talking about what happened at the summit. Because the story's not dying like it was supposed to." Ronan's jaw tightened. "We need to change tactics." They held a strategy session that night in Garrett's cabin. Ronan, Elena, Garrett, Hayes, Kira, and a few others from Ashmark's informal leadership. Lyra sat in the corner, listening. "Hiding isn't working," Ronan said. "They're going to find us eventually. We need to go on offense." "Against Ironwood?" "That's suicide," Hayes said. He was cleaning a knife as he spoke, the blade flashing in the lamplight. "Not against Ironwood directly. Against the narrative." Ronan looked at Lyra. "What Cade did to you, it worked because he controlled the story. Everyone believes his version, that you were weak, unstable, that the rejection was justified. We need to change that." "How?" Lyra asked. "By telling your version, publicly, loudly, so loudly they can't ignore it or suppress it." Elena leaned forward. "You want to make her a symbol, turn the rejected mate into a rallying point for everyone who's been screwed over by the pack system." "Exactly." "That's dangerous," Hayes said, setting down his knife. "You make her visible. Everyone comes looking, not just Cade. Everyone with a grudge against the current power structure will either want to use her or destroy her. They're already looking, at least this way she has support. People who believe her story, who see her as someone worth protecting." Ronan looked around the room, and it puts pressure on Cade and the council, makes it harder for them to move against her without exposing themselves. Garrett rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. It could work, but she'd need to be ready, need to be able to stand up to scrutiny, to challenges, to people trying to tear her down or expose her as a fraud. Everyone looked at Lyra. She thought about it, about stepping back into the light, making herself a target, about facing down the same people who'd watched her be destroyed and done nothing, about standing in front of crowds who might jeer or worse. Her stomach churned at the thought. But what was the alternative? Keep hiding until Cade found her? Live in fear forever? "I'm ready," she said. "You sure?" Ronan asked. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." They spent a week planning, crafting Lyra's message, deciding where and how to deliver it. They settled on the Crossroads Market, a neutral trading hub where people from all over the frontier converged. No single pack controlled it. No council had authority there. It was as close to neutral ground as existed in the territories. The plan was simple. Lyra would speak. Tell her story in her own words. Challenge the narrative that she'd been weak, unstable, unworthy. And then they'd see what happened. "It's going to be dangerous," Kira warned during one of their planning sessions. "Cade will probably be there. He monitors the crossroads. And if he shows up, then everyone gets to see us face to face," Lyra said. "Let them judge for themselves who's telling the truth." The night before they were set to leave for the crossroads, Lyra couldn't sleep. She sat outside her cabin, wrapped in a blanket against the cold, watching the stars wheel overhead. Kira found her there around midnight. "Nervous?" she asked, sitting down beside Lyra on the wooden steps. "Terrified." "Good. Means you're not an idiot." Kira pulled out a flask and took a sip, then offered it to Lyra. "You know what you're walking into tomorrow?" Lyra drank, some kind of harsh alcohol that burned going down and made her eyes water. A trap, probably. Almost definitely. Cade will have people there, maybe the council too. They'll try to discredit you, humiliate you again, maybe do worse. I know. And you're going anyway. I have to. I'm tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of letting other people control my story. Lyra handed back the flask. I need to prove I'm not what they said I was. You don't need to prove anything to them. Maybe not, but I need to prove it to myself. Lyra looked at the stars. I need to know I can stand in front of them and not break. Kira nodded slowly. Then you'll do fine. She stood, brushing off her pants. Get some sleep if you can. Tomorrow's going to be hell. The Crossroads Market was bigger than Lyra expected. The natural amphitheater carved into the rock formation stretched for what looked like miles. Hundreds of stalls and vendors spread across the space in a chaotic sprawl. Thousands of people moving through the market, buying, selling, trading, haggling. The noise was overwhelming. Voices raised in argument or laughter, animals calling, music from street performers competing for attention and coins. Ronan had arranged for a platform in the central square. It wasn't much, just a raised wooden stage, maybe 8 feet across with space for 10 people at most. Rough construction, probably thrown together in a few hours. But it would do. They arrived mid-morning, the sun already beating down hard. Set up. Waited. Word spread fast. Within an hour, a crowd had gathered in the square. Curious faces, skeptical expressions. Some Lyra recognized from the summit. She saw the Clearwater delegation woman, saw a few Ironwood Pack members trying to blend into the crowd. Others were strangers drawn by curiosity or boredom or the promise of drama. And then she saw him. Cade, standing at the back of the crowd, surrounded by at least a dozen of his people. He wasn't trying to hide, wasn't being subtle. He wanted her to see him, wanted her to know he was here. Their eyes met across the distance. His expression was unreadable. Not angry, not afraid, just watching. Lyra stepped onto the platform. The crowd quieted slowly, conversations dying away in waves as people noticed her. She looked out at hundreds of faces and felt her courage waver. This was insane. She was nobody. Who was she to stand here and demand they listen? What made her think her words would matter to any of these people? But then she remembered the riverbed, remembered facing Marcus with nothing but her voice and her will, remembered Garrett kneeling in the hall at Ashmark because she'd commanded it. She could do this. She had to do this. My name is Lyra Dain, she said. Her voice carried, amplified by the natural acoustics of the amphitheater, clear and strong. 3 weeks ago, I was publicly rejected by Cade Merrick, alpha of the Ironwood Pack. I was called weak, unstable, unworthy, and in front of everyone who mattered, I was cast aside like trash. The crowd was silent now, listening. She had their attention. I'm here to tell you that was a lie, someone shouted from the crowd. Prove it. I will. But first, you need to understand why the lie was necessary, why Cade couldn't just let me go quietly. She took a breath, steadying herself. Because I was never weak. I was inconvenient. I was a threat to his carefully controlled authority, because people listened when I spoke, because I could command respect without needing his permission or his approval. More voices now. Some jeering, some interested, some just shouting to be heard. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me, Lyra continued. I'm asking you to recognize what this is really about. It's about power, about who gets to decide who matters and who doesn't, about a system that elevates some people and crushes others based on bloodlines and politics instead of actual ability. She scanned the crowd and found Cade, spoke directly to him, her voice cutting through the noise. You rejected me because you were scared, because you saw what I could become and you knew you couldn't control it. So you tried to destroy me before I could become a problem. Cade pushed through the crowd. People parted for him automatically, that ingrained deference to an alpha. He stepped forward until he was at the base of the platform, looking up at her. Is that what you tell yourself? His voice was calm, condescending, the same tone he'd used when explaining things to her like she was stupid. That I was scared of you? Yes. You were unstable, Lyra. Everyone at the summit saw it. The way you'd lose control, the way you'd override my decisions in front of other alphas, undermine my authority when I needed to show strength. I never undermined you. I supported you. I backed every decision you made. She leaned forward slightly. until I realized you were wrong. Wrong about what? About me. About what I was capable of. About thinking you could control something you didn't understand. She stepped to the edge of the platform, looking down at him. You want to humiliate me again? Go ahead. Try. But this time, I'm not going to stay silent. This time, everyone's going to see who you really are. Cade's jaw tightened. A muscle twitched in his cheek. You're making a mistake coming here, drawing attention to yourself. No, I made a mistake trusting you. I made a mistake believing that being chosen by someone like you meant I mattered. She straightened. This is me fixing it. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the crowd, addressing them instead of her. Don't believe her. She's desperate, broken, grasping at anything to salvage what's left of her reputation. She'll say anything. Then prove it, Lyra interrupted. Prove I'm lying. Explain why you had to reject me publicly instead of privately. Explain why you've been hunting me ever since. Sending people to trading posts, asking questions, offering rewards for information. Explain why you're so threatened by one woman with no pack, no resources, no authority. He didn't answer. His mouth opened, then closed. He couldn't answer, not without revealing more than he wanted to. And in that silence, Lyra felt something shift. People were looking at him differently now, questioning. The absolute certainty in the narrative he'd built was cracking. She could see it in their faces, doubt creeping in. That's what I thought, Lyra said. She looked out at the crowd, at all those watching faces. I'm not asking you to choose sides. I'm not asking you to fight for me or against Cade. I'm just asking you to question the stories you've been told, to ask who benefits from those stories, to ask why someone with nothing to gain would stand here and risk everything to tell a different version. She paused, letting that sink in. And I want you to remember that power isn't just what you're born with. It's not just bloodlines and titles and inherited authority. It's also what you build, what you earn, what you prove you're capable of. She stepped off the platform. The crowd erupted in noise, arguments, debates, people shouting over each other. But Lyra didn't stay to listen. She walked through them, head high, with Ronan and Elena and the others from Ashmark flanking her like an honor guard. Cade didn't try to stop her, just watched her go with an expression she couldn't read. They made it back to the vehicles without incident, started the drive back to Ashmark. That was either brilliant or completely insane, Elena said from the driver's seat, checking the rearview mirror constantly. Both, Ronan replied. He looked at Lyra in the back seat. How do you feel? Like I just stepped off a cliff and I'm not sure if I'm flying or falling. Good description. He smiled slightly. But you did well. You challenged him publicly and he couldn't answer. That's going to spread. People are going to talk. Will it be enough? To change everything overnight? No, but it's a start. You've planted doubt. Now we see if it grows. They drove in silence for a while. Lyra watched the landscape pass, her mind replaying the confrontation. The look on Cade's face when he couldn't answer her question. The doubt in the crowd's eyes. She'd done it. Stood up to him in front of everyone. And she hadn't broken. She'd been terrified the whole time. Her hands had shaken. Her voice had wavered once or twice. But she'd done it, and that felt like victory. A small one, maybe. But victory nonetheless. When they reached Ashmark, people were waiting in the central square. The whole settlement, it seemed. Word must have traveled ahead, someone with a radio or a phone passing the message. Garrett stepped forward as they climbed out of the vehicles. We heard what happened, he said. Word travels fast out here. And? Ronan asked. And people are talking, not just here, everywhere. The story's spreading through the trading networks. He looked at Lyra with something that might have been respect. You've made yourself a symbol whether you wanted to or not. People are calling you the rejected who fought back. Some are saying you're brave. Others are calling you a troublemaker. But nobody's calling you weak. Is that good or bad? Lyra asked. Depends on who you ask. Garrett gestured to the crowd. We voted again, just now, before you got back, about whether you stay. Lyra's heart stuttered. And? Unanimous in favor. A hint of a smile crossed his weathered face. Turns out we like people with spine, people who stand up when everyone expects them to stay down. Welcome to Ashmark, Lyra, for real this time. The crowd cheered. Not everyone. She could still see some skeptical faces, some people who clearly still had doubts. But enough. Enough to matter. Kira appeared with a bottle of something that looked homemade and probably illegal, grinning widely. We're celebrating, no arguments. The night turned into an impromptu party. People shared food and drink. Someone produced instruments, a guitar, a fiddle, something that looked like a modified accordion. Music filled the square. Children ran around laughing and shrieking. Adults danced or talked or just sat and enjoyed the rare moment of pure celebration. And for the first time since the rejection, Lyra felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. She wasn't fixed, wasn't healed. The wound Cade had left was still there, still raw in places. She still had nightmares about the summit hall, about his blood on the floor, about 100 faces watching her fall and doing nothing. But she was building something new, something stronger, something that was hers. She was becoming someone who couldn't be dismissed or destroyed with a few words in a public ceremony. Someone who mattered, and that was worth celebrating. Ronan found her later, away from the noise and the crowd, sitting on a bench at the edge of the square watching the stars. "You did good today," he said, sitting beside her. "We'll see. Cade's not going to just let this go." "No, but you've changed the game. Made it harder for him to control the narrative. Made people question whether his version was the whole truth." He paused. "You know what comes next, right? More training." "More training, yes. But also, you need to decide what you're fighting for. Is this revenge? Justice? Building something new? You need to know because people are going to look to you now. You've made yourself visible, made yourself a symbol. That comes with responsibility." "I never asked for that." "No one asks for it. It just happens when you stand up." He turned to look at her. "But for what it's worth, I think you can handle it." "Why?" "Because you're still standing. After everything they did to you, after everything that's happened, after every reason you had to give up, you're still here, still fighting, still pushing back." He met her eyes. "That's not weakness, Lyra. That's strength. The kind that matters. The kind that lasts." He stood to go, then paused. "One more thing. That moment on the platform when you challenged Cade and he couldn't answer, that wasn't just you telling your story. That was you taking power, real power. Not the kind that's granted or inherited, the kind you claim." He smiled. "That's what scared him. That's what's going to change everything." He left her there, alone with the stars and the distant sound of celebration and her thoughts. Lyra stayed there for a long time, thinking about what came next. About Cade and the council and the power structure she'd challenged. About the people who were starting to see her as a symbol of resistance. They would come for her eventually. Cade. The council. Others who saw her as a threat. But when they did, she'd be ready. She'd be stronger, smarter, more dangerous. She'd be someone they couldn't ignore. Someone they'd regret ever underestimating. The rejected mate who rose from humiliation and became something no one expected. Something powerful. Something that would make them all pay for the day they decided she didn't matter. And that thought, that promise to herself, felt like the beginning of everything that came next. The message arrived 6 weeks after the crossroads. A young courier on a dirt bike, face covered against the dust, handed Elena a sealed envelope and left without saying a word. Elena brought it straight to Ronan. Lyra was in the training yard when he found her, working through combat drills with Hayes. She'd gotten faster, stronger. The ankle had healed. She could move now without thinking about it, could react without hesitation. "We need to talk," Ronan said. They gathered in Garrett's cabin, the core group who'd been planning and training with Lyra for weeks. Ronan opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "It's an invitation," he said, "to the Winter Summit, 3 weeks from now." Lyra's stomach dropped. "From who?" "The Frontier Council itself, signed by all 7 members." He handed her the paper. She read it. Formal language, carefully worded. They were requesting her presence at the summit to address concerns and clarify recent events. They promised safe passage and fair hearing. "It's a trap," Elena said immediately. "Of course it's a trap," Ronan agreed. "Question is what kind." "They want to discredit her publicly," Hayes said. "Put her on trial, make an example of her so no one else gets ideas about challenging the system." Garrett nodded slowly. "Or they want to make her disappear, get her somewhere they control, where there are no witnesses who'll talk." "So I don't go," Lyra said. "If you don't go, they'll say you were scared. That you were lying all along. Ronan looked at her. And they'll have justification to come after you harder, to declare you a rogue, a threat, to send official enforcement. And if I do go, then you walk into their territory, on their terms, surrounded by people who want you gone. He paused. But you also get a platform, a chance to speak to the people who matter, to force the council to address what Cade did in front of everyone. That's assuming they let me speak, Lyra said. They will. They have to. The invitation promises a hearing. If they go back on that, it undermines their own authority. Ronan leaned back in his chair. They're betting you won't show, or that if you do, you'll break under pressure. They'll ask questions designed to make you look unstable, emotional, unreliable, and then they'll dismiss you. What if I don't break? Then everything changes. Lyra looked at the paper again. 3 weeks. I need time to think. You've got until tomorrow, Garrett said. After that, we need to start preparing if you're going. She spent that night walking the perimeter of Ashmark, thinking. The settlement had become home over the past weeks. She knew people now. Kira and her terrible homemade alcohol, Hayes and his endless war stories, Vera and her quiet wisdom, the children who'd adopted her as a combination older sister and curiosity. She'd built something here, found people who valued her for what she could do, not what bloodline she carried or who'd chosen her. Walking away from that felt wrong, but staying while the council painted her as a coward felt worse. She found Ronan at the Eastern Watchtower, looking out at the darkness. I'm going, she said. He didn't seem surprised. You sure? No, but I'm doing it anyways. She joined him at the railing. If I hide, they win. They get to control the story forever. Everyone believes I was weak, that Cade was justified. And if you go and they destroy you, then at least I tried. At least I stood up. She looked at him. You said I needed to decide what I'm fighting for. I know now. I'm fighting for everyone who's been told they don't matter. Everyone who's been discarded because they didn't fit someone else's mold. I'm fighting to prove that power doesn't have to be inherited. Ronan smiled. Good answer. They spent the next 3 weeks in intensive preparation, not just physical training, though there was plenty of that, but strategy. Garrett brought in people who dealt with the council before, who understood how they operated. They drilled Lyra on questions she might face, taught her how to deflect, how to turn attacks into opportunities. They'll try to make you angry, Vera explained during one session. Anger makes you sloppy, makes you say things you don't mean. Stay calm no matter what they throw at you. They'll bring up your past, Kira added. Anything embarrassing, anything that makes you look bad, have answers ready. Own your mistakes before they can use them against you. And remember, Ronan said, you're not there to convince the council. They've already decided. You're there to convince everyone watching, the people who'll hear about this, who'll talk about it, who'll decide whether to believe their version or yours. The night before they were set to leave, the whole settlement gathered for a send-off. It wasn't quite a party. The mood was too tense for that, but it was a show of support. People brought food, shared drinks, told Lyra they believed in her. You come back, one of the children said, hugging Lyra's leg. A girl maybe 7 years old who'd appointed herself Lyra's shadow. Promise. I promise to try, Lyra said, because she wouldn't lie to a child. They left at dawn. Ronan, Elena, Hayes, Kira, and Lyra in 2 vehicles. The drive to the summit location took 2 days. They stayed in a roadside shelter the first night, taking turns on watch. Lyra barely slept. When she did, she dreamed of the first summit, of Cade's blood on the floor, of walking through that crowd while people laughed. The winter summit was held in a different fortress than the spring gathering, this one further north, built into a mountain. Colder, harsher, more imposing. They arrived the day before the hearing, checked into their assigned quarters, simple rooms in a guest wing, and scouted the layout. The hearing's in the main hall, Ronan said, studying a map. Same room where Cade rejected you. Of course it was. They want you off balance, Elena said. Want you thinking about that moment instead of focusing on now. I can handle it. I know you can. The morning of the hearing, Lyra woke early, dressed carefully in clothes Kira had helped her choose. Practical but dignified. Not trying to look like she belonged with the powerful, but not apologizing for being there either. Ronan knocked on her door at 8. Ready? as I'll ever be. They walked to the main hall together. It was already filling with people, delegates from various packs, council members, curious onlookers who'd heard about the rejected mate who'd dared to speak up. Lyra felt their eyes on her, heard the whispers. She kept her head up, kept walking. The council sat at the high table, 7 people representing different regions of the frontier. She recognized a few faces from the spring summit. Others were new, and there, sitting with the Ironwood delegation, was Cade. He looked the same, maybe a little tired around the eyes, but still confident, still powerful. He met her gaze across the room and something passed between them. Not hatred, not fear, just acknowledgement. This was happening. The head counselor, a woman in her 60s named Marin, called the room to order. "We're here to address a matter of significant concern," she began. Her voice carried easily, practiced from years of public speaking. Lyra Dain has made serious accusations against Alpha Cade Merrick of Ironwood Pack. She claims her rejection was unjust, that she was targeted for possessing abilities that threatened his authority. These are grave charges. Marin looked at Lyra. "You requested this hearing by your actions at the crossroads. You have it. Speak." Lyra stood, walked to the center of the room, the same spot where she'd stood weeks ago. "Thank you for this opportunity," she said. Her voice was steady. "I'm here because I was rejected publicly and humiliated in front of this community. I was told I was weak and unstable. I'm here to show that was a lie." "That's your opinion," one of the council members said, a man named Torres. "Alpha Merrick has the right to choose his mate." "If he found you unsuitable, he found me inconvenient," Lyra interrupted. "There's a difference. I wasn't rejected because I was weak. I was rejected because I was becoming strong, because people in his pack were listening to me, respecting me, coming to me for guidance. That threatened his authority." "Do you have proof of this?" Marin asked. "I have witnesses who will testify that Cade was ordered by council members to reject me, that there were concerns about my influence." Murmurs in the crowd. Marin's expression didn't change. "Bring forward your witnesses." Lyra's heart sank. This was the gamble. She'd sent word to Mira weeks ago, asking her to come, to testify. But she hadn't heard back, didn't know if Mira would show, or if Cade had prevented her somehow. The doors at the back of the hall opened. Mira walked in, and she wasn't alone. 3 other wolves from Ironwood Pack followed her. Young ones, like Mira. The ones who'd been kind to Lyra, who'd seen what happened. Cade's face went pale. Mira walked to the center of the room, stopped beside Lyra. "I'm Mira Chen of Ironwood Pack, and I'll testify." "This is inappropriate," Cade said, standing. "These are my pack members. They don't have authority to— They have authority to speak the truth," Ronan said from where he stood at the side of the room. "Unless you're saying Ironwood wolves aren't allowed to have opinions?" Marin held up a hand. "Let her speak." Mira took a breath. "I heard Alpha Cade talking to his second, the morning before the spring summit. They were discussing Lyra. Marcus said the council was concerned about her influence, that she was overstepping, commanding respect that should go to the Alpha. Cade said he'd handle it, that after the rejection, she wouldn't be a problem anymore." "That's hearsay," Torres said. "I was there too," one of the other wolves said. A young man named David. "I heard the same conversation. We all did." The 3rd and 4th wolves nodded. "This is a coordinated attack," Cade said. "They're lying to damage me." "Why would we lie?" Mira asked. "We risk everything being here. Our positions, our pack standing. We gain nothing from this." "Except revenge for your precious Lyra." "We gain truth," Mira interrupted. "Something this council is supposed to value." The hall erupted in arguments. Marin called for order, had to shout to be heard. When quiet finally returned, she looked at Cade. "Do you deny that concerns were raised about Lyra's influence?" "Concerns are always raised about potential mates. That's normal. It doesn't mean—" "Do you deny," Marin repeated, her voice sharp, "that you were advised to reject her?" Cade hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. "I made my own decision," he said. "That's not what I asked. I had concerns, others shared them. I made the choice I thought was right for my pack." "By destroying her publicly?" Lyra asked. "By making sure everyone saw me humiliated? If you just had concerns, you could have ended it privately. But you didn't. You made a spectacle of it. Because you needed to understand, I needed to be silenced. Lyra took a step toward him. You needed everyone to see me broken, so they wouldn't listen when I said you were wrong. When I pointed out your failures, your weaknesses. When I showed that I could lead just as well as you could. You couldn't lead, Cade said. You had no experience, no training. I had presence. Lyra let it flow into her voice now. Let that power she'd been training color her words. I had the ability to make people listen, to inspire loyalty, to command respect without demanding it, and that terrified you. The room had gone silent again, everyone watching this confrontation play out. Show them, Ronan called from the side. Show them what you can do. Lyra looked at Merrin. May I? The counselor looked intrigued. Proceed. Lyra turned to face the crowd, hundreds of people, all watching, judging. I'm going to ask you all to do something, she said, and you're going to do it because some part of you recognizes that I have the right to ask, that my words carry weight. She let the presence build, felt it flowing through her like electricity. Stand. The entire room stood. Not everyone immediately, some fought it, especially those loyal to Cade or the council. But within seconds, everyone was on their feet, compelled by something they couldn't quite name. Now sit. They sat. Lyra turned back to Merrin. That's what Cade was afraid of. That's why I had to be destroyed. Because I can do that without a title, without a pack, without any of the traditional sources of authority. I just can. Merrin was studying her with new eyes. That's a rare gift. It's not a gift, it's who I am, and Cade tried to destroy me for it. Because it's dangerous, Cade said. He was back on his feet now, anger breaking through his controlled facade. You can't be trusted with that kind of power. You don't understand what you're doing, the damage you could cause. The damage to your authority, you mean? Lyra faced him fully. That's what this has always been about, not whether I was suitable, not whether I was stable, but whether you could control me. And when you realized you couldn't, you got rid of me. I protected my pack. You protected yourself. At my expense. She could feel her own anger rising now, hot and fierce. You took everything from me. My position, my dignity, my future. You tried to break me so thoroughly that I'd disappear and never bother you again. And yet here you are. Cade smiled, but it was cold. Bothering me. Yes. Here I am. Still standing, still fighting. Everything you tried to destroy, I rebuilt. Everything you said I couldn't do, I did. She stepped closer. I survived you, Cade, and that's your worst nightmare. He stared at her, and for the first time she saw real fear in his eyes. Merrin stood. This council has heard enough. We'll deliberate and announce our decision. There's one more thing, Lyra said, before you decide. Speak. This isn't just about me and Cade. This is about a system that allows this to happen, that gives some people power over others based on bloodlines and politics instead of ability. That silences anyone who doesn't fit the mold. She looked around the room. How many of you have been rejected, cast out, told you don't matter? How many have watched it happen to others and done nothing? Silence. But she could see it in their faces. Recognition. Memory. I'm not asking you to overthrow anything. I'm asking you to question, to demand better, to stop accepting that power belongs only to those born into it. She turned back to Merrin. And I'm asking this council to acknowledge that what Cade did was wrong, that using rejection as a weapon to silence someone is an abuse of power. You want an apology? Torres asked, skeptical. I want accountability. I want it on record that this happened, that it was unjust, and that it won't be tolerated going forward. Merrin looked at her fellow council members. They huddled together, talking in low voices. The hall waited in tense silence. Finally, Merrin turned back. This council finds that Alpha Cade Merrick acted within his rights to reject his chosen mate, she said. Lyra's heart sank. They were ruling against her. However, Merrin continued, the manner and motivation behind the rejection raised serious concerns. Using public humiliation as a tool to suppress an individual's legitimate abilities and influence constitutes an abuse of authority. The hall erupted. Cade was on his feet, protesting. His supporters were shouting, but others were cheering. Merrin raised her hand for silence. Therefore, this council formally censures Alpha Cade Merrick. This censure will remain on his record. Additionally, we are establishing new guidelines regarding mate rejections. All future rejections must be reviewed by regional councils to ensure they are not being used as weapons against individuals who threaten established power structures. It wasn't everything, but it was something. Acknowledgement, validation. Furthermore, Marin said, looking at Lyra, this council recognizes Lyra Dain as an individual of significant ability and standing. She is granted independent status, answerable to no pack or alpha, and we formally invite her to address the full Frontier Council on the matter of reforming our current systems. The noise in the hall was deafening now. People arguing, celebrating, protesting. Lyra just stood there, trying to process what had just happened. She'd won. Not completely. Not perfectly. But she'd won. Ronan was suddenly beside her. We need to leave. Now, before Cade's people decide the council's ruling doesn't matter to them. They moved quickly, surrounded by Hayes and Elena and the others from Ashmark, made it to their vehicles and left the fortress behind. They were miles down the road before Lyra finally spoke. Did that really just happen? It happened, Elena said. You just changed the Frontier power structure. Might take a while for people to realize it, but you did. The council censured an alpha, Ronan added. That's unprecedented. And the new guidelines, those will change everything. People can't be silenced the way you were anymore. They'll find other ways, Lyra said. Probably. But you made it harder, and you gave people hope that fighting back is possible. They drove through the night, wanting distance between themselves and the summit. Stopped at a roadside shelter to rest and eat. Mira and the other Ironwood wolves were there, having left separately. They looked exhausted but relieved. Thank you, Lyra said to Mira. You risked everything. You risked more. And you were right. About Cade. About all of it. Mira sat down heavily. We can't go back to Ironwood now. We're done there. Come to Ashmark, Kira offered. We're always looking for good people. Mira looked at the others. They nodded. Yeah, okay. They reached Ashmark 2 days later. The whole settlement was waiting. They'd heard the news through the trading networks, stories spreading faster than Lyra could travel. Garrett met them at the gate. You did it. You actually did it. We did it, Lyra corrected. None of this happens without all of you. The celebration that night was bigger than the send-off had been. Real joy this time, not just hope. People dancing, drinking, sharing stories about what this meant, what might change. But Lyra found herself drawn away from the noise. She walked to the edge of the settlement, to the spot where she'd sat that first night, watching the stars. Ronan found her there. You okay? He asked. I don't know. I thought I'd feel different, victorious or something. She looked at the stars. Instead, I just feel tired. That's normal. You've been running on adrenaline for weeks. He sat beside her. It'll catch up eventually. What happens now? Now you decide what you want to build. The council's given you a platform. People are listening. You've got influence. I don't want influence. I just wanted to prove Cade wrong. Too late. You've got it whether you want it or not. He paused. But you get to decide what you do with it. You can walk away, disappear, live quietly, or you can use it to keep changing things. What would you do? Me? I'd burn the whole system down and start over. He smiled. But I'm not you. You're better at building than destroying. Lyra thought about that. About the council's invitation to address them on reform. About the people who'd see her as a symbol, who'd look to her for guidance. I don't know if I'm ready for that. You weren't ready for any of this. You did it anyway. He stood. Take some time. Figure out what you want. The opportunity will wait. He left her there with her thoughts. Lyra stayed up watching the stars until the settlement quieted and the fires burned down to embers, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. From the girl who'd been rejected and humiliated to the woman who'd forced a council to acknowledge their own failures. She wasn't the same person who'd stood in that hall weeks ago, that Lyra had been broken, desperate, unsure of her own worth. This Lyra knew what she was capable of, knew her power, her value, knew she could stand in front of hostile crowds and make them listen. But she also knew she was still learning, still making mistakes, still figuring out who she wanted to be. The next morning, Kira found her. There's someone here to see you. It was Marcus, the man from the riverbed, from Clearwater Delegation. Lyra's hand went to her weapon, but he held up empty hands. I'm not here to cause trouble, he said. I'm here to apologize. For what? For taking Cade's money, for hunting you. for not seeing that you were in the right until it was too late. He looked uncomfortable. What you did at the summit, standing up to the council, to Cade, that took guts. More than I've got. What do you want? Nothing. Just wanted to say I was wrong about you. And if you ever need anything from Clearwater territory, you've got an ally. He left before Lyra could respond. Over the next weeks, more people came. Some to apologize, some to ask advice, some just to see the woman who'd challenged the system and won. Lyra met with them all, listened to their stories. Many had experienced similar rejection, similar humiliations. They'd stayed silent because they thought they had to. You showed us we don't have to accept it, one woman said, that we can fight back. And slowly, Lyra began to see what Ronan had meant. She had influence, people were listening, and she could use that to help others, to change things. She started small, helped people file complaints against abusive alphas, connected those who'd been cast out with settlements like Ashmark that would take them in, spoke at regional gatherings about the need for reform. The council invitation sat on her table for a month before she finally wrote her response. She'd come. She'd speak. But not about reform in the abstract. She'd bring people with her. People who'd been rejected, discarded, told they didn't matter. She'd give them a platform to speak their truth. Let the council hear it directly. 3 months after the Winter Summit, Lyra stood in the council chamber, not alone this time, surrounded by 50 people she'd gathered, all with stories like hers. Marin looked at the crowd. This is highly irregular. So was publicly destroying someone to silence them, Lyra replied. But here we are. She spoke for an hour. Then she let the others speak. One after another, they told their stories. The council listened, growing increasingly uncomfortable. When the last person finished, Lyra faced Marin directly. You asked me what I wanted. This is it. I want a system where this doesn't keep happening, where power is earned, not inherited, where people aren't destroyed for being different or threatening the status quo. That's a complete restructuring of frontier society, Torres said. Yes, it is. That will take years, decades maybe. Then we'd better start now. The council conferred, argued. Finally, Marin spoke. We'll form a committee to study potential reforms, with representatives from traditional pacts and from independent settlements. You'll chair it. It wasn't revolution, but it was a start. Lyra returned to Ashmark and got to work, building coalitions, training others to use their voices, their presence, creating networks of support for those who didn't fit the traditional mold. A year later, she stood on a platform at the Summer Summit, not as someone's rejected mate, not as a curiosity or a troublemaker, as someone who mattered, who'd built something real. Cade was in the audience. They'd seen each other a few times over the year at various gatherings. The anger had faded, replaced by something closer to resignation. He'd lost standing after the censure, lost respect. Some of his pack had left, including several who'd joined Lyra's growing network. Their eyes met across the crowd, and this time there was no fear in his expression, just acknowledgement. She'd won, not by destroying him, but by building something better. Lyra looked out at the faces watching her, hundreds of them now, from all over the frontier, people who'd come to hear what the rejected mate had to say. A year ago, I stood in a different hall and was told I didn't matter, she began. I was rejected, humiliated, cast aside. I was supposed to disappear, to break, to give up. She paused, let that sink in. But I didn't, and neither did the hundreds of others who've been treated the same way. We rebuilt, we found each other, we created something new. She gestured to the people standing with her on the platform, representatives from a dozen independent settlements, people from traditional packs who'd fought for reform from within, wolves and humans and others who'd decided the old way wasn't working. We're not trying to destroy what exists, we're trying to make it better, to create a frontier where ability matters more than bloodline, where you're judged by what you do, not who your parents were, where being different isn't a reason to be cast out. The crowd was silent, listening. Change is slow, it's hard, there will be setbacks, but it's possible. I'm proof of that. We all are. She looked at Ronan, standing at the edge of the platform. He nodded, proud. So here's what I'm asking. Question the stories you've been told. Question who benefits from keeping things the way they are. And when you see someone being silenced, being destroyed for threatening the status quo, Don't look away. Stand with them, because that could be you next time. She stepped back. The crowd erupted. Some cheering, some arguing, some just stunned. But they were talking, questioning, changing, and that was enough. That night, back in her cabin in Ashmark, Lyra sat at her desk and wrote. Not a speech or a proposal, just thoughts. Reflections on the journey from that horrible night to this moment. She'd been rejected as nothing. She'd risen as something no one could control. And in the process, she'd learned something important. Power wasn't what they gave you. It was what you claimed for yourself, what you built when everyone said you couldn't. She'd built a movement, a community, a future where people like her, people who didn't fit, who threatened the comfortable order, could survive, could thrive. Was it perfect? No. There were still fights ahead, still resistance, still people who wanted things to stay the same, but they couldn't ignore her anymore. Couldn't pretend she didn't exist. She mattered. They all did. And that truth, that simple, powerful truth, was worth everything she'd been through to learn it. Lyra closed her journal and looked out the window at Ashmark, at the settlement that had taken her in, trained her, helped her become who she needed to be. Tomorrow she'd keep working, keep fighting, keep building. But tonight, she let herself feel what she'd earned. Victory. Not over Cade, though that was part of it. Victory over the voice in her head that had said she was worthless. That said she deserved what happened. That said she should give up. She'd proven that voice wrong, and nothing could take that away. She was Lyra Dain, the rejected mate who refused to break, who rose from humiliation and built something better, who showed the frontier that power doesn't have to be inherited or granted. It can be claimed. It can be earned. It can be used to help others instead of crushing them. And that legacy, that truth, would outlast any rejection, any humiliation, any attempt to destroy her. She'd survived. More than that, she'd won.